Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, I sit up in my bed. My back is as straight as a pencil, my ears perked forward to attention like a dog. I heard a sound. I was sure of it. It sounded so close, but what was it? It was too close for comfort. I feel slightly unsettled. It's as cold as ice when I lean over the edge of my bed, my feet meeting the wooden floor, which is why my grandmother is always telling me to wear socks to bed, especially now that the autumn is upon us here in the bluegrass state. It would seem the warm summer days belong to the past, as if the sun has retired for a season and is taking a much-needed respite. There is a distinctive, very pronounced chill in the air. I glanced down at my blue pyjamas, covered with red London buses, with writing all over the pyjamas, with places like Piccadilly Circus, Mayfair, Kensington, all scribbled over the fabric in a decorative scroll-like print. They were a gift from my mother when she returned from London recently. I've never been to London, but I have a thing about buses, especially bright red London buses. Even my duvet cover has not escaped my zealous passion and ebullient enthusiasm for London buses, as it's also covered in exactly the same identical fabric as my pyjamas. And if that isn't enough for you, there are two model red London buses standing in pride of place on the shelf next to my dresser that my mother bought for me from the famous toy store in Hamleys in London. I also own a plethora of other model cars and a bright red fire engine, but the London buses are an absolute favourite with me. I guess I just love the bright red colour. I wish our buses here in America would be a bright red colour like this. I also like the conspicuous bright yellow taxicabs of New York, so I own a few models of them as well. I shiver again. I feel the distinctive drop in temperature. My grandmother's right. I should wear socks to bed. She always insists that going to bed with socks on your feet gives you a much better night's sleep. The moonlight is filtering through a crack in the curtain, peppering its silvery blue like shadows over my room, that bounce off my cupboards in an ethereal luminescence. I can see everything distinctly, as the soft night light is also on in the passage, the object being that I can see my way clearly to the toilet in the middle of the night, without being too intimidated by the dark. I think my grandmother thinks that because I'm only 10 years old, going on 11, that it's a given or set in stone, if you like, that I must be terribly afraid of the dark. She told me she could never get to sleep without a light on when she was a young girl. She always believed there were monsters hiding under her bed, waiting to grab her. I've never been scared like that of the dark, but I never told my grandmother that. I don't want her to feel bad about being such a scaredy cat when she was round about my age. I'm a lot braver than she was. I can hear the noise again, a rustling, flapping sound. It's so close it could be coming from inside my bedroom. I feel a bright smile stretching itself across my face like a large elastic band being pulled incredibly hard, as I've just heard a familiar hooting sound, and my hope escalates. Could there be an owl on my windowsill? I tiptoed towards the window, twitching the curtain back ever so slightly. Thankfully it slides back along the railing, without making much of a sound. But there she is. She's perching on my windowsill, as I'd hoped. She's quite a big tawny white owl, with distinctive brown markings along her feathery plumage, with a large, wide, magnificently transfixing pair of golden eyes. But she seems plucky, audacious. She's unafraid of me. She hoots, remaining perched on my windowsill for a while. For a moment her head swivels around in my direction. Her round golden eyes meet mine. I feel a strange soulful connection as our eyes lock. I'm certain she's not abashed by me, for she remains perched on my windowsill for what seems like an awful age, as if she's quite comfortable and at ease in my presence. Then I hear a flapping sound as she stretches out her wings and flies away. I walk towards the window, peering outside my grandparents' backyard to see if I can see where she went, but she's gone. The accented light of the moon makes out the silhouettes of the barn, the long expanse of the meadow, fringed by the dense black vertical forms of the tall imposing trees of the wood grove that are so ambiguous in this foggy haze that we call night. I suddenly realise I'm thirsty. Thoughts of warm chocolate milk and cookies flood through my mind. My stomach grumbles in eager anticipation of this pleasing suggestive thought that I'd gladly like to bring to fruition. I stumble awkwardly towards my closet, fumbling around in my drawer, pulling on a pair of socks, easily balancing on one leg at a time like a flamingo, as I roll one sock after the other upon my feet. I reach for my navy blue velvety dressing gown, hanging behind the hook of my bedroom door. I throw it on my shoulders, tying the belt around my middle in a rough knot. The tall oakwood grandfather clock that stands proudly in the hallway chimes midnight. But as I trudge down the staircase in my socks, I can hear the soft mumble of chatting voices. My grandparents must still be up, which is surprising, as they're usually in bed by 10. I stealthily move towards the living room and peer through the door. I can see the 5'4", slightly rounded figure of my grandmother, wearing her faded old pair of blue jeans and a white coverall sprinkled with paint, with her grey hair pulled away from her face in a messy ponytail. She's standing in front of the wooden easel, which supports a medium-sized canvas, holding a paintbrush in her hand, dappled with yellow gold paint. She assiduously focuses all her attention on the autumn leaves of the oak trees, trying to encapsulate the rich resplendent colouring of the leaves on their boughs at this time of the year, which she wants to get absolutely right. She's painting a picture of the barn, with the Rhode Island reds and Brahma chickens pecking the ground in the foreground for worms. She has been working on this canvas for a couple of days now. She's not actually a bad artist. It's a good likeness of our barn, with the red oak trees that stand behind the barn, against a cloudless cobalt blue sky. My grandfather is sitting by a crackling fire that looks like it's hanging on for dear life to its last red-orange embers that bespeckle the chalky grey crumbling timber as the fire is burning itself out, with faint wisps of spiralling grey smoke that rise up into the chimney pane. My grandfather has a bulbous brown cigar in his mouth. He's filling the room with a familiar white pungent smoke, while he's glancing through yesterday's paper. I don't know why Emma is even bothering to pick up Parker tomorrow to take him back to New York. Why does she even consider doing so? She doesn't even want anything to do with her son, my grandmother is saying. My blood runs ice cold. They're talking about me. They're discussing my mother's obvious indifference insouciance about picking me up in the morning. They rarely think that at 10 years old I'm naively unaware of my mother's heedless detachment and impassivity towards me. It certainly doesn't take a rocket scientist to discern whether someone wants to be around you or not. I always hated when my mother picks me up to take me back to her fancy apartment in New York City, in the highly esteemed Tribeca neighbourhood that has been so lavishly decorated by a high-profile interior designer. But it looks more like a luxurious hotel suite than a home. It lacks so much personality, and the wholesome homeliness you find in a natural, cosy space you can call home. It's the kind of place like a picture in a magazine catalogue, that is so perfect you feel like you can't relax, in case you soil the sofa with chocolate stains from melted ice cream on the pristine white fabric that will show up every detail of the dirt so conspicuously. I can see that my mother picks me up to take me to the airport for the 2.5-hour flight to New York, because that's what a mother is supposed to do, as she dutifully exercises the muscles of her maternal duties like a gym workout she resents having to undertake, but she does so anyway. When I'm in her presence, I sense I'm a burden to her, a responsibility that she could well do without in her hectically busy life. My mother's an international journalist, travelling to war-torn areas of the world. I sometimes see her face on the news as she discusses world events. If you ever feel sorry for people who make it their passionate mission to travel to far-flung corners of the globe, to get caught up in the heart of potentially dangerous situations, and appear to be rushing around in a frantic frenzy, you need to know that they're there because they want to be. They're inspired and enthused by drama and action. For them, it's like a quintessential adrenaline rush that gives them a physical high. I know it's true. I've seen it in my mother's journalist friends. It's like they can't get enough of living on the edge, rather like those people engaged in daredevil pursuits, like hanging from a falling plane, flying through a mountain, free-falling 220 feet in an airbag, or jumping Snake Mountain on a motorbike. For to these adventurous people, rather like my mother, being at home for an extended period of time is like a fate worse than death. So don't ever feel sorry for them, for they love living on the edge and dicing with death. It makes them feel alive. Well, that's what my mother always says. "Well, you know what our daughter's like," I hear my grandfather say. "She's always had ants in her pants. Never could sit down for a moment when she was a little girl. It was like she was always on the go. Had to be doing things all the time. It would drive us both potty. Don't you remember? She was also such a tomboy, climbing trees, getting into no end of scrapes. Parker, well, he's so different, that boy. He reminds me of myself at his age. He can just sit down patiently and watch the world go by. But his mother, if she's not doing something, she's not living." "You don't happen to think that our daughter might suffer from ADHD? Attention deficit disorder, I believe it is?" asked my grandmother. "There's so much about it these days on the news." "Oh, absolutely not. That would imply that our daughter cannot focus or concentrate. If something holds her attention, no one can focus better than our daughter Emma. No, our daughter's only problem is she's easily bored. I think she finds looking after Parker exceedingly dull. I'm quite sure she's dreading picking him up tomorrow morning. More's the pity. Parker is a delightful boy, but she doesn't see that. He's wasted on her. He deserves a mother that will really appreciate him." At that poignant moment, my grandmother looks up. Her eyes meet mine. I can't help myself, but tears begin to erupt in my eye sockets, spilling down my cheeks. There is nothing worse than feeling like a baby, but I cannot pretend my mother's lack of interest in me has not been cutting. But hearing my grandparents talking about my mother's apathy and affirming what I've always clandestinely known is like adding salt to the wound. It stings. For some reason I've always blamed myself for not being interesting enough to hold my mother's attention. I've seen how the other parents at school interact with their children. My mother has never been like that. As for my father, I know nothing about him. Neither does my mother. I know I was conceived in Italy, when my mother had a drunken fling with a perfect stranger, and subsequently fell pregnant. So who my father actually is, well, let's just say it's anybody's guess. For even my mother has no memory of that night, when she got so bladdered under the stars in Italy, and rather over-familiar with a tall, dark, handsome Italian stranger. My grandmother's crinkled face furrows with lines. Her blue eyes soften. She puts down her paintbrush on the palette, rushing towards me, enfolding me in her arms. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. You weren't meant to hear that." She wipes the tears from my eyes and directs me towards the kitchen, where she warms up some chocolate milk for me, and places a couple of chocolate chip cookies on a plate. She takes a seat opposite me on the oak wood kitchen table and reaches out to hold my arm. Now, sweetheart, what you heard is true. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. You're a very clever young man, and I would never dishonour you by trying to pull the wool over your eyes. Your mother loves you in her own way. You know she does. But she's never been demonstrative or good at expressing love, and emotionally she's exceedingly withdrawn. What I would describe as dispassionately detached, which is a good thing for the kind of job she does, as she cannot afford to allow sentiment to subjugate or prevail over her purpose, which would be easy to do if she's reporting on poverty in Africa and exposed to the devastation of starving children, which is ultimately distressing to witness. Your mother has to have a tough skin like a rhino. I assure you, her indifference towards you is never personal. You must know that, sweetheart. She's as equally nonchalant towards me and your grandfather. She's always been like that since she was a little girl. That's part of her personal makeup, of what makes her uniquely who she is. Your mother is not like the rest of us. She's not like regular folk that enjoy the practicalities of everyday life. Your mother likes to live in a world where she's on the edge of danger, in the firing line, doing exciting things that would make most people recoil in horror. The way you have to look at it, sweetheart, is we're all different. It's not good, nor is it bad. It's what it is. But it does mean that being maternal is not your mother's strong point. That's why she doesn't want to hang around with me. I'm too boring, I say, another tear spilling down my cheek. Now don't you start talking like that. You're not boring at all. Don't you ever think like that, do you understand? I nod. I'm sure we're all boring in your mother's eyes. As to her normality is dull, which is why her life is a yo-yo of serendipitous experiences where the unexpected is a likely occurrence every day of her life. Your mother likes that element of surprise, but predictability is rather too dull for her. Granny, I don't want to go back to New York with Mummy. I want to live here all the time with you and Gramps. Can't I stay here? I hate going back in Mum's apartment. It's horrible. I always feel I'm in the way there. I don't want to feel like that anymore. I really hate it there. I hate it. Please can I stay here with you forever? You really don't want to go back to New York with your mother? No. Please don't make me, Granny. I never feel comfortable with Mum. She's like a stranger to me. I tell you what, I'll speak to your mother for you and see what she has to say about the matter. My grandmother's account. My daughter was never easy. A difficult, demanding, highly strung child growing up. She was driven by an inquisitive curiosity, an inquiring mind, a galvanizing, audacious drive to be doing something adventurous with her life. She would have the startling, mind-blowing propensity or predisposition to get very bored. She needed her mind to be perpetually stimulated. As a mother, I was always searching for ways to keep her interest focused. When she acquired a job as an international journalist, it was like she was living on her adrenaline rush that she had been searching for all her life. Needless to say, she thoroughly embraced this brand new journey with a zealous enthusiasm and zeal, and blossomed after having found a vocation that stirred her passion, opening up doors of venturesome, intrepid opportunity to explore newsworthy events around the globe. She adored her job and was always on the move, chopping and changing, welcoming in new experiences. My daughter was certainly not the kind of person that would ever want to settle down to the bog-standard, humdrum, mediocre predictability of what she would presumptuously consider the drudgerous routines of conventional daily life, which included getting married or raising children that most of us would gladly welcome and embrace as part of the rich tapestry of life. But not my daughter. Ostensibly it was just not written in her DNA, and she admitted as much, confessing that if she was ever to have kids of her own, she would be the world's worst mother. A divulgence of hers upon which I heartily agreed. So when my daughter announced one day she was pregnant, my heart sank, especially when she couldn't even identify who the father was, as I believe emphatically whenever possible, every child should be raised with a father and mother figure. My daughter was determined to have her baby, but she ended up passing her son over to us, which we never minded about at all. Indeed, Parker is like a son to us, and we couldn't envisage our lives without him, as he has been a blessing and a gift. When Parker overheard us talking about his mother, his true underlying emotions bubbled to the surface. I realised that he was mindfully aware of his mother's aloof insouciance towards him, which I assured him was not personal and had nothing to do with him, which he began to appreciate and accept. I think for him being able to express his true feelings about his mother's lassitude was cathartically healing. When he expressed no desire to spend time with his mother, we discerned that Parker needed above all else stability, security and love in his life, without having to periodically go off and stay with his mother, yo-yoing between Kentucky and New York all the time, which we knew long-term was no life for him. Fortunately, after talking to my daughter, she agreed that her son remaining with us would bring him the stability he desperately craved, so he would remain permanently in the countryside. My daughter would visit him when she wished. For the first time in ages, I was able to see my grandson really blossom and come to life on the farm, where me and my husband have resided over the last 20 years. I raised all three of my daughters in New York. When my husband retired, we decided to move to the bluegrass state of Kentucky, as my husband fancied the idea of growing his own vegetables, and any excess we would sell organically at the farmer's market. We also were desirous to have a couple of American quarterback horses that we could ride regularly, and in truth, we never looked back. I thought living in the countryside would make me miss the cosmopolitan allure of New York, but I surprised myself how seamlessly I adapted to life in the countryside, and how much pleasure me and my husband extracted from growing our own food, that not only enhanced our health, but our sense of accomplishment as well. Recently my husband grew a 500-pound pumpkin in our backyard, where since then we've grown a plethora of different vegetables with remarkable success. Our farmhouse is a wooden symmetrical affair, painted in a pale lemon yellow, with white wooden windows and shutters, and a black slate roof. On the lower elevation of our house, we have floor-to-ceiling windows, along with a wraparound porch, with white balustrades. I wanted large windows throughout the property, to embrace the spectacular transfixing views, overlooking the billowing verdant valley, and the pretty meadows where our horses frolic away happily all day long. In the furthest distance our fields are flanked by a fabulous wood grove, consisting of dogwoods, oaks, pecan nut trees, beeches, hickory, and maple trees. Our barn is situated adjacent to our farmhouse, along with a large carport and a stable block. The whole area is richly paved with a combination of red brick and contrasting white pebbles, which is aesthetically very pleasing. Over the last few years, I've become friendly with a woman who lives in the neighbouring farm. One day she came to visit me for her regular cup of coffee that we enjoy together every Tuesday morning. On this occasion she seemed terribly excited. She drove her truck down our long driveway, parking directly outside the front door. Mimi is a woman in her early 60s. She's a keen horse rider. I'm used to seeing her attired in jodhpurs, a cotton shirt and riding boots. I think living in those clothes is a standard uniform for her, as she gives horse riding lessons every day to her students, and more recently she's been teaching Parker how to ride. As we sit down to enjoy our coffee together, Mimi looks like she's bursting to tell me something, and then she comes out with it. "I think I saw a Bigfoot yesterday," she tells me. "A Bigfoot," I say. "Aren't those things... well, aren't they fictitious?" "Well, I never thought they were real," she admits to me. "But after my experience yesterday, I realise they have to be. If they're not real, then I don't know what the hell it is that I saw. It was when I was giving your grandson Parker his riding lesson. I noticed something was watching us from behind an oak tree, that was looking particularly magnificent with its golden leaves, I hasten to say. I was focusing on the lesson with Parker, but in my peripheral vision I saw a head peeking out from behind the oak tree, about 70 feet away from the riding ring. I could see this human-looking head, with a pointed tip, peering at us curiously, as if fully engaged in watching the lesson. Its dark eyes seemed keenly focused on your grandson. I think Augustus, my horse, actually sensed his presence, as on 2 occasions he willfully actually stopped and looked in the direction of the tree, and he neighed. But I'm glad to say it was like a friendly acknowledgement from my horse, as if he was saying, 'Hi, you there behind the oak tree, I know you're there.' Augustus is a very social horse, you see. I don't think Parker noticed anything, so I never said a word to him, but I don't mind admitting that I barely concentrated on that lesson. My hands were trembling so much. It's not every day you witness a Bigfoot on your property. Mimi's eyes grow round. She grabs my arm, giving it a tight squeeze. So there I am, trying to focus on the riding lesson, but I'm failing abysmally. My heart is thundering in my chest because I can feel that Bigfoot is watching us. I don't want him to know that I know he's there. I'm afraid to scare him off. I have the sense he's benevolent, but very evasive, and seems to be so focused on watching our riding lesson. Goodness knows why. My mind is shouting at me, don't look or he'll run away. But another part of me is saying, if you don't look, I might not get another chance. So I turn around and look directly at the creature. He stepped away from the tree. For a few fleeting seconds I see him. Oh my God, it was definitely a Bigfoot. Easily 8 foot tall, incredibly big, lofty, graceful, magnificent. For a moment my eyes meet his. Even from that distance I could see he had the most beautiful eyes, the colour of treacle. He turned around and glided away, but when he moved, it was like he was floating on air. I couldn't believe what I'd seen. Look at me. I'm still shaking from the experience. How extraordinary, I say. But are you absolutely sure you weren't seeing something else? Mimi looks annoyed and very disappointed when I express my doubt and misgivings. I'm sure I saw a Bigfoot, she says. For if it wasn't a Bigfoot, then I don't know what else it could possibly have been. But after she's confided her story to me, she becomes increasingly despondent, as she senses my cynical doubt, and is quick to change the subject. But I can see the hurt in her eyes that my scepticism has clearly provoked. I don't know what to make of my neighbour's claims. The idea of Mimi seeing a Bigfoot seems nonsensical, but when I discuss it with my husband, he laughs at the idea, dismissing it out of hand, insisting my friend must have seen something else. But judging by my friend's insistence on what she saw, my doubts are lessening significantly. Back to Parker. My grandmother kisses me goodnight on the cheeks. These days I sleep a lot easier, as I'm so glad to feel assured that my permanent residence is here at the farm with the people I love best in the world, whom I consider my parents. It makes me feel so much more settled. I fall asleep and awaken with a start, as if something's given me a sharp nudge. I sit up and am certain I've heard a sound, a light banging. I sit up in my bed, my ears attentive, my heart skipping in my chest. I'm hoping that I'm being visited by the owl again, whom's been visiting me quite regularly, but I haven't seen her for the last couple of days. Maybe she's back and is making her presence known. I hope so. I always leave a crack in the curtain to allow the moonlight to filter through the room, so I can surreptitiously pull the railing back, very, very quietly, watching my owl friend perched on the window pane. I hear the noise again. It doesn't sound like my owl friend. It's coming from downstairs. I'm sure I can hear something or someone shuffling around outside the farmhouse, and occasionally it sounds as if something is actually banging our wooden rafters. I know it could be raccoons ferreting around and thumping things, but then again, it might just be something else. If there's anything that I've inherited from my mother, it's possibly an investigative mind. If I hear a strange noise, what others might reject or dismiss out of hand, I need to check in order to uncover the mysterious source. Otherwise I won't be able to sleep. It's cold this morning. I know it's morning as my cell phone is registering 2:30 a.m. I've been sleeping with socks on at night, but I can't help but notice the pronounced chill in the air. I rise out of bed shivering so much that even my teeth are chattering. I know winter is well on her way, as so many of the fabulously beautiful golden leaves from the trees of the woodgrove are beginning to fall onto the ground, layering the earthen floor in a plethora of golden confetti. I grab my dressing gown, throwing it over my shoulders and tying the belt around my middle in a big knot. I hear the banging sound again. Someone is walking around our farmhouse. I even hear the white pebbles being crunched under ponderous feet. Someone is out there, but who? And at this crazy time of the morning? This conundrum warrants investigation. I want to find out who or what is outside our farmhouse, loitering around in the dark shadows. I don't know why. I'm not even scared. Fear does not bridle my bit. Instead, I am overwhelmed with an unblemished curiosity that demands my attention. seizes my focus so that all other wavering insecurities and doubts are expunged from me, like the water being squeezed from a sponge. I dart down the sweeping staircase as fast as I can. I nearly trip over a toy mouse that one of my grandmother's mischievous marmalade cats has left lying precariously on the step, eager to trip me up. I stealthily slip past my grandparents' bedroom door on the lower floor where they prefer to sleep, which is always left ajar. I peer cautiously into the room. 2 marmalade cats are lying fast asleep between 2 lumpy bodies that are both snoring. Thankfully, they're both fast asleep. I need to be careful not to wake them up, for they wouldn't appreciate me creeping out of the house at this early time of the morning when it's pitch black outside. I race towards the front door, throwing on a pair of boots that are lined up underneath the coat hooks where various outdoor heavily padded coats are hanging. I tiptoe to the door, unclasp the chain, twisting the key in the lock. It makes a loud clicking sound. I stand still for a moment and then turn the key in the lock, pressing open the door ever so slowly at first. Thank God it doesn't squeak. My grandfather has oiled the hinges very well. I'm greeted to blasts of icy cold air, thrashing my face like icy hands. I carry a flashlight in my hand and venture cautiously outside the front door. It's my turn to crunch the white pebbles, laced artistically between the red brick paving. I can hear the rustling of autumn leaves, blowing in the wind, as the trees behind the barn are swaying briskly, their boughs jiggling up and down, while fallen leaves are blowing up in the wind like celestial butterflies. Then there's the distinctive sounds of crickets and frogs serenading the night. I'm trying to be as quiet as possible. If someone's out there, I don't want them to see or discern my presence, nor do I want to draw attention to myself by making a conspicuously different noise. It is a dark night, but there is enough moonlight to discern the shape of the barn, along with the vertical dense silhouettes of the trees that define the fringes of the woodgrove. I flash my torchlight around the house. I see a dark, obscure figure crouched down on our patio, its head pressed against the glass pane of our sliding doors. Oh my God! Someone's looking right into our home! I'm frozen to the spot. I come to the horrifying revelation that this dark stranger, whoever he is, dressed in a black woolly outfit with what looks like a black balaclava over his head, is planning to break into our property. Maybe he could potentially hurt one of my grandparents. I am gripped with a dreadful horror as my mind flashes before me with scenes of gruesome horror movies I've seen in the past, where vindictive evil men with sawn-off shotguns break into people's houses to bring about scenes of graphic carnage. I shudder at this very thought, my eyes squeezing tightly shut. I can't believe this is happening. This is hauntingly surreal. I don't know what I should do. I can taste the bitter bile rising up at the back of my throat as every cell in my body is held hostage to terror. I better get back into the house as quickly as I possibly can, right now, before it's too late. I have to wake my grandfather up at once so that he can get his hunting rifle at the ready. Call the police. I turn around. I creep away stealthily, back to the house, as quietly as I possibly can. But a pebble comes flying towards me, hitting me perfectly on my back. I now know I've been seen. My heart begins to thud violently in my chest, like a very fast drum roll. I turn around to find myself standing a few feet away from this Herculean-sized silhouette that is like the hugest dark shadow that you've ever seen in your entire life. What on earth is it? It's so intimidating. It's easily over 8 foot tall, but I can only see its outline. I want to scream as loudly as I can, as this black dense silhouette is the most terrifying thing that I've ever beheld. I try to scream, but my voice box has been seized from me. No words emanate from my mouth. I physically tremble, and slowly, very surely, I reluctantly draw the light of my torch onto this thing's face, whatever this thing is. My grandmother had been afraid of monsters as a girl. I had dismissed monsters, the idea that monsters could possibly be real. But now I'm not certain. I might be staring at one. This creature is like the most incredible Hulk. It's covered in long flowing, relatively dense hair that is as black and shiny as a raven's feathers. The creature is trying to cover his eyes, My torchlight is bothering him immensely. But when my torch leaves his face, dropping to chest level, it is then that I see his face clearly. I'm expecting to be staring into the eyes of the devil himself, for only the face of evil can be seen from a body as daunting and as imposing as this, surely. But I'm taken off guard, like a surfer being flung off his board. I'm staring at such a human face that has the look of an Indian warrior, a face ruggedly handsome and noble-looking, with high cheekbones, a sloping forehead, deep-set hooded eyes. But it's his eyes that confound me the most. They are benevolent, kind, very kind, which seems incongruous to the daunting, terrifying shape of this beast that I am beholding. I know what this is. I've heard about these things before. It's a Bigfoot, but it can't be anything else. It's indicating for me to follow him, but can I trust him? I'm torn between a rock and a hard place. I remember hearing in church from one of the pastors there that even the devil poses as an angel of light. Could this incredulous, idiosyncratic creature be luring me to a deadly trap? But another scripture bolts into my head. By their fruit you will know them. The creature has kind, beautiful eyes. He exudes a warm energy. Surely evil cannot be hidden behind kind eyes. Are not eyes the window of the soul? The tenacious creature is indicating for me to follow him again. I'm surprised, but I do, for any fear I had moments before has been ripped away from me like a band-aid off a scab. I find myself intrigued, rather curious. It could be a duplicitous, guileful trick, I know, and that thought does whisper into my mind, but I willfully ignore it, as I hear the thought in my head, by their fruit you will know them, again and again. I'm now following the creature into the woodgrove. He beckons to me, and there he leads me to a tree. Lying under the tree, wrapped up in an animal skin, is a tiny white puppy, which the critter retrieves from the ground. He picks the puppy up and hands it over to me, still wrapped in the animal skin. The puppy is incredibly cute, a white ball of fluff. I take the puppy in my hands, and in my head I hear the words, "I chose you. I chose you." I'm sure I imagined that voice, but it didn't feel like my voice. The creature glides with me to my farmhouse and watches me take the puppy indoors, and then it retreats back to the woodgrove and is gone from my sight. As I enter the house, I bang the front door loudly behind me and cry out to my grandmother, "Granny! Granny! Granny!" My grandmother comes charging out of her bedroom with her dressing gown in her hands. She looks panicked. She looks terrified. She looks very, very concerned. Her face is paled. She looks like she's about to have a coronary. "What's happened? Is everything all right? What's going on?" She throws on her dressing gown, relieved to see the expression on my face is animated, so she physically begins to relax. "It's a puppy," I say, smiling at her jubilantly. "Please can I keep it, Granny?" "Don't you ever do that again to me, Parker. You scared the living daylights out of me, calling me like that. Look at the time. It's dark out there. Where on earth did you find that puppy from?" she says, unrolling it from the deerskin. The puppy is squealing. It's tiny, but incredibly cute. "I think he needs something to eat," says my grandmother, going into the kitchen to prepare him some puppy food. "A Bigfoot gave her to me," I say. "A really nice Bigfoot, Granny." My grandmother's face pales. "Parker, that's not funny. Don't make stuff like this up. Is this because you heard me talking to your riding instructor?" "No, what you talking about, Granny? What has my riding instructor got to do with a Bigfoot?" "Well, she claims to have seen a Bigfoot watching you during your riding lesson. I must admit I thought her story was preposterous, but you're saying a Bigfoot physically handed a puppy to you. I'm only inclined to believe you, as who on earth would wrap up a puppy in a deerskin like that?" "That's what I'm saying. I saw him close up, Granny. He definitely was a Bigfoot. He was really nice. His body was very, very scary, but his face was so nice. His eyes, so kind, Granny." "Well, I never," says my grandmother. "You live and learn something new every day. The world is so full of surprises. I think I owe an apology to your riding instructor for disbelieving her testimony." In the days that follow, the little puppy is a delight to behold, and I take him wherever I go. One morning as I'm in the grassy meadow playing with my puppy, for a brief moment when my attention is diverted and my back is turned, a huge hawk descends from the sky, and in her talons she's picked up my puppy. My heart flips over as I behold this horrifying scene. This is the stuff of nightmares. Surely this can't be happening. Before I can even reflect on the gravity of what is unfolding, I hear a loud, raucous, inauspicious scream, and then I see a stone being hurled up into the sky, which hits the hawk, who instantaneously, out of shock, releases her grip on my puppy, and then from behind a tree, the Bigfoot runs towards the puppy that comes dropping from the sky. He catches it in his hands like a ball. The puppy is crying. That was not a pleasant experience for her, by any manner of means. The relief I feel is immeasurable. The Bigfoot hands me back my puppy, whom I decide to call Chance, as she's had a second chance at life, despite the odds stacked against her. Since that rather curious, incongruous event, I haven't seen the Bigfoot again, but I know he's out there in the woodgrove somewhere, watching over us. In hindsight, I believe he selected Chance to be my dog, which was why he was spying on me during the riding lesson. My grandmother believes that in some way the Bigfoot alerted me to his presence that night, when he tried to get my attention, for even when I went into the yard, he was looking into the living area. The fact that he disabled a hawk from stealing my puppy leads me to believe he was watching over the little thing, even after he'd given it to me, to make sure I was looking after it well, and that it was safe. One day, as I was in town with my grandmother, I brought my dog along with me for a walk, and I encountered another dog, a breed known as a Labradoodle, and my dog was the splitting image of this dog in every way, apart from the fact that the other dog was a boy and mine was a girl. But they looked like they were related. We got talking to the woman, who told us she'd recently bought the puppy from a local woman in the area who didn't live very far away from us. All the puppies had been boys, with only one girl that was born to the litter. She had wanted a girl, but unfortunately she couldn't have one, as one night the puppies were walking around in the backyard, and a coyote grabbed one of the puppies, the only girl in the litter. It was ironic that the puppy that I have was a girl, which leaves me to ask this one question. Did the Bigfoot who gave me the puppy, that he saved from a hawk, also save the puppy from the mouth of a coyote? Is it not possible? If that is indeed the case, it may seem that it's not only cats that may be afforded many lives. Chance has grown up to be a beautiful dog. I'm now 15 years old. I'm glad to say my relationship with my mother has grown in leaps and bounds. You see, now I appreciate her personality. I don't take offence to the fact that she's not the settling down type of person. I do find it much better when she visits me on the farm for a few hours or so, once in a while. And that has meant that I know when she's visiting me, it's not out of duty and responsibility, but because she genuinely wants to see me, which makes a world of difference. To date, I'm glad to have been raised on the farm by my grandparents. I love living in the countryside, and because my grandparents are the mother and dad I never had, I've come to the realization that not all people are meant to be parents, which may be why the Bigfoot was very particular in finding the right owner for Chance. I'm of the opinion that some animals are meant to come into our lives, and Chance was clearly meant to be mine. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, it's a Saturday morning. My 8-year-old son Eli is jubilantly playing with his model toy cars. I can hear him making those familiar brrr sounds in his bedroom. I hear the rubber wheels whirling across the floor. Sometimes cars crashing into each other with a very loud bang. He's the one positive thing in my life that I would never ever change. A good froid or mistake, if you like, that I never regretted, although the timing, of course, was really off. In my case, I was far too young to have a baby. So much has transpired over the last 8 years since Eli was born. If I could have done things differently, with the benefit of hindsight, I certainly would. I was like a random hat being blown off someone's head in the wind, allowing it to be guided down its own trajectory, obliviously unaware of its final resting place, which could be being submersed in its own watery grave, or revived by someone else's hands, as fate ultimately decides its end. I was young and naive at the time,
An ignorant 16-year-old who'd fallen pregnant. A moment of madness with a boy I didn't even know, I'm ashamed to confess. We may be living in the 20th century. It would seem when a young girl my age falls pregnant, it's not the catastrophic event for a family that it may have been in the 1950s, where reputation was everything, and having a baby out of wedlock was greatly frowned upon. Suffice to say, even in the midst of the 20th century, a fortuitous unforeseen pregnancy can be catastrophic. It certainly was for me, as in that moment my whole world came crashing down in a matter of seconds. I remember clandestinely purchasing a pregnancy test that in itself was an arduous mission, which invited a few wavering, disapproving glances at the chemist from older people. I had surreptitiously hidden the brown paper packet in the back of a white bathrobe hanging on the hook of the bathroom door. It would seem days went by. My vacillating procrastination became my faithful friend. A stalling denial is certainly easier to live with than facing the impending truth. It was so much easier to pretend that none of this was actually happening to me. But a firm nudge in my guts, a chasmic sense of knowing haunted me, when an impassioned voice whispered from my belly what I already knew, but willfully denied hearing. "You're pregnant. You're pregnant. You're pregnant." I'd lock the bathroom door behind me and covertly pull the brown paper packet containing the pregnancy test out of the pocket of my bathrobe. My heart would pound. I would cautiously look at the test, examine it closely, stare at it, while tears would spring down my face. I was far too afraid to open it, to pee on it. The words pregnant would scare the living daylights out of me, far worse than any Freddy Krueger movie ever could. I just couldn't do it. Maybe if I did nothing and pretended none of this was actually happening to me, it then would all go away. The thought of telling my parents that I was pregnant was for me the most terrifying thing in the entire world. I could already see the bitter disappointment in my father's face. I delighted in making him proud. I was his little girl. Knowing that his girl was pregnant would break his heart. And as for my mother, well, I wasn't quite sure how she'd react, but she wouldn't be pleased, I can tell you that. My mother could be quite hard-hearted if the need arose. Quite a cold fish, that's for sure. One day I'm in my bedroom, lying obliviously on my bed, completely naive and unaware of the mayhem that is about to unfold. I was watching YouTube videos on my cell phone at the time. My mother comes barging into my bedroom. She's oscillating her arms indignantly, like a frantic octopus. Her face is as white as a sheet. Her blue eyes look horrified. She sits down at the end of my bed, throwing the pregnancy test in front of me. The brown paper packet pounds my chest, falling by my side. Oh my God, she's found it. My heart begins to throb. My eyes refuse to meet hers. "You've got some explaining to do, young lady," chides my mother. Her face is so savage. She would make an irate Rottweiler look like a serene pussycat. My throat becomes so foggy. No words come out. "Well, what have you got to say for yourself, young lady? Are you pregnant?" "I don't know," I say. Maybe. I'm not sure." "You're not bloody sure? So you've been with a boy?" I avoid my mother's thorny gaze. Shame floods all over my body like a hot flush. I feel her eyes piercing right through me. The judgment, the condemnation, the disgust are like daggers piercing through my chest with heavy thrusts. "You're 16 years old, for God's sake! You're just a child! You've been with a boy!" She looks mortified. I'm sorry, Mum," I blubber, the tears spilling down my face. It only happened once. It was a mistake." My contemptuous mother drags me by the collar of my dress, pulling me up to my feet. I stumble awkwardly on wobbly legs as she propels my body out of the bedroom towards the bathroom. "Well, aren't you going to at least find out if you're pregnant?" She pulls the pregnancy test out of the bag, opens the box, removes the applicator from its packet, thrusting the test in my hands. "Go and pee on that now," she demands. My mind is whirling, my body trembling. My hands won't stop shaking. I feel violently sick to the stomach. I don't think I can do this. I can't do this. My mother is waiting outside the toilet cubicle. I'm so afraid. Afraid of my sanctimonious mother. Afraid of the results of this test. My mind is screaming. I want to run away as fast as I can. Get the hell out of here, away from my mother. I feel as if the world is closing in on me, as if I can't breathe. My captious mother is pounding the bathroom door so hard. I'm afraid, so I dutifully pee on the applicator, placing it on the side. Well, says my mother, have you done it yet? My voice squeaks. Yes. My mother thrusts open the bathroom door, grabs the test from me. She lets out a huge groan. Oh, my God! And throws the test at me. You're bloody pregnant, you stupid, stupid, stupid girl! In the morning I'll be taking you to the clinic to get your abortion. Who's getting an abortion? Asks my father. His face grows pale. He's just returned from work in downtown Boston, possibly overheard my mother's raised voice, and darted up the staircase to see what all the commotion was about. Oh, my God! My father is the last person in the entire world I want to disappoint. I didn't want him to know about this. And judging by the mortified, acrimonious expression on my mother's face, she didn't want him to find out either. Your little girl has only just gone and got herself pregnant. She has a bun in the oven. My father's face pales, but he doesn't become priggishly moralizing or angry like my mother. His emotions remain stoically in check. He cradles me lovingly in his arms as the tears spill down my face. My head is buried in his neck. I'm sorry, Daddy. I'm so sorry. I saturate the collar of my father's shirt with my tears. He smells of Old Spice. I love that smell. It always makes me feel shielded and safe. My father has always worn that aftershave. It's all right, sweetheart. Everything's going to be all right, he says, patting me on the back reassuringly. Unlike my unkind, reproachful mother, who's spitting like a viper, foaming at the mouth like a rabid dog, my father's reaction brings me a measure of assurance and solace. I know he's got my back. Are you living in the twilight zone, Harry? You think everything is all right? Our daughter is bloody pregnant, for God's sake. She's been with a boy, Harry. She's only 16 years old. Don't you get that? What on earth is wrong with you, Ruby? Young girls get pregnant all the time. It happens. Yes, the timing is off, but it happens in life. You're making it sound as if our daughter was responsible for bringing down the Twin Towers. The reproving way you're laying into her is unreasonable. I'm sorry, but it is. Look at yourself. You look like a bloody viper. You're spitting so much. If anyone should be ashamed with themselves, it's you. You're being far too dramatic. But our daughter, Harry, is 16, for goodness sake. She's only a child. She's been knocked up by a boy. Don't you get it? It's not acceptable. Worse things have happened, Ruby. Get a grip. You're the only one that's losing it here. Harry, I'm losing it because in the morning I'm going to be taking our daughter to an abortion clinic. Then I'm going to have to take her to a family planning clinic so she can go on the pill. This cannot happen ever again. Our daughter has her whole life ahead of her. She can't be trusted to be responsible, that's clear. We can't allow something like this to ruin her life, rob her of her entire future. My father lets out a huge sigh. This is not going to ruin our daughter's life. She's having a baby. Our grandchild, for goodness sake. She shall not be aborting our grandchild, and that is final. If she can't look after him or her, I will take responsibility for raising it myself. Hire a nanny. But there will be no abortion in our home. Every child is a gift of God. In my opinion, every fetus has a soul. My mother now turns her wrath upon my father. You've got to be kidding, Harry. You don't have a say in this matter. This is our daughter's life we're talking about. And there's no way on God's earth she's going to have that baby. Do you understand what I'm saying? I have to put my foot down. I'll be taking her to the abortion clinic tomorrow, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. My father is the one that is now growing angry, but not with me, with my mother. You will do no such thing over my dead body. Do you understand that? If you take our daughter to the abortion clinic, that will be the ultimate act of betrayal. I regret to say that my pregnancy causes a rift in my parents' relationship that is incredibly bad. In the beginning, they argue ceaselessly. I feel bad. I'm the cause of them snapping at each other's throats, day in and day out. One morning, once my father has left the house for his job in downtown Boston, my mother tells me we're going to the abortion clinic behind my father's back. I don't like the sound of this at all. It's deceptively treacherous, underhandedly deceptive. It feels like we're cheating on my father. I don't think I want to get rid of this baby anyway. In my gut, it feels morally wrong. If my father's right, and that a soul is already in a fetus, then how can I kill my baby? This thought bothers me greatly, and leaves me feeling very aggrieved. Yes, being pregnant is inconvenient, but just because it's bad timing does not mean I have a right to extinguish a human life. Now, I don't want you to tell your dad about this. Under no circumstances must he know about this, she demands. I'm doing this for your own good. You can tell him that you had a miscarriage. It's a harmless white lie. It's not going to hurt anyone. You're young, for goodness sake. You can't be tied down with a baby at your age. It's ridiculous. You can have children when you're older. At this young stage in your life, it's just a fetus. It won't feel a thing. Your father is talking absolute nonsense about a few cells having a soul. He has no clue what he's talking about. But don't I have a say in the matter? I mean, I'm 16, going on 17. This is my body. Isn't it my choice? I'm not sure I actually want an abortion. It doesn't feel right. Besides, we can't do this behind Dad's back. You know that is unethical. Sweetheart, your hormones are all over the place. You're not thinking right. That's what happens when you fall pregnant. Your brain goes to mush. It flies out the window. Believe me, I know. When I was pregnant, I also became incredibly vague. Besides, if the truth be told, you don't have the moral high ground here. You got pregnant with a boy you don't even know. So you're not exactly in a position to call the shots. One day you'll be thanking me for this. You'll be so glad you were spared all this responsibility of raising a baby at such a young age. At the abortion clinic, a kind nurse is talking to me. I think she's in her 30s. She has a compassionate manner about her. Once again, my mind is a whirl. I'm sitting there feeling aimless and lost. I'm not certain exactly what I should do. I know this is difficult, she says. We've established you're 7 weeks pregnant, so it's early days now. But you're the one that ultimately must make the decision of whether you want to terminate this pregnancy or not. You cannot allow anyone else to influence your final decision. It's not up to your parents or anyone else for that matter to decide what is emphatically your choice to make. This is your body. What happens in an abortion? I ask her. This is known as a medical abortion, she explains to me. It works using a combination of 2 pills. The first pill I will give you to take stops your ovaries from producing progesterone, which is needed by your body for pregnancy. The next pill is taken 6 to 48 hours later, which empties the uterus of the fetus and causes cramping and bleeding, initiating the miscarriage. Do you want to do this? I nod dutifully, thinking of how furious my mother will be if I don't do this. But it feels all wrong. Does my dad not have a say in any of this? And what about me? How do I actually feel about this? The truth is, I don't know. But abortion feels all wrong. There's a life growing inside of me, for goodness sake. If there is even a remote possibility there's a soul in this fetus, then I cannot do this. I just can't. A tear spills down my cheeks as the nurse hands me the pill and water. She quickly retracts the pill, her face growing concerned. Look, this is none of my business. I'm a nurse, but I've been in your shoes before. I fell pregnant when I was at your age, so I know how you feel. You did? I asked, looking up at her gratefully. It helps to talk to someone else who's worn my shoes and has been in the same predicament as I am. She nods. In my case, my parents were pressurizing me to get an abortion. I went through with it to appease them. but it is not something I wanted to do. It's ruined my relationship with my parents. I've never been able to forgive them. It was my body, my decision, and they imposed their will upon me. When I found out the Pleiades, the people from the stars, whether you believe in that or not is up to you, but they say the soul enters a fetus at 3 weeks. So I had to live with the fact that maybe I'd killed my own baby, and that's so hard to accept for me personally. But then everybody's extremely different. They all have different opinions in the matter. I've had one lady, for example, who comes into this abortion clinic again and again. I think she's been here 10 to 12 times. It's water off a duck's back to her, taking the pill. For her, it's like drinking an aspirin. That's why I do what I do. I choose to work for them, as I want to stop others like myself from doing something they might regret, if they have any doubt in their mind, that is. If you haven't decided what you want to do, then don't do it until you're certain of your choice. You have a baby growing inside of you. This is a decision that should never be taken light-heartedly. For some people, having an abortion is a huge relief. But for others, like myself, it is the biggest regret of their lives. Some people believe abortion is morally wrong. Others believe people, especially women, have a right to choose. The nurse is terribly kind. The tears are rolling down my cheeks. She hands me a box of tissues sympathetically, muttering some more kind words. I wipe away my tears, blow my nose hard, gather my purse together, rise up from my chair and say, "I still need to think about it." "Good girl," she says. "You need more time. That's a wise decision if you ask me." My mother is delighted that I've swallowed the pill. I don't tell her that I never took it. It's like all her Christmases have come at once. She takes me to Toscanini's in Main Street to buy double-thick milkshakes to celebrate the fact that we've got rid of her grandchild. Something about that makes me feel nauseously sick to the stomach. And it's in that moment I decide that I'm keeping this baby. Yes, there are going to be hurdles to have to overcome along the way, but somehow I will manage. My father has already assured me that he'll take care of things financially for me. And with that kind of emotional and financial support with a father who's behind me 100% of the way, I'm really not in a position of being compelled to have an abortion. That evening I confided my father about my mother taking me to the abortion clinic. Perhaps I shouldn't tell him, but I feel somehow it's my duty to do so. My father is enraged. I see the indignation on his face. He believes my mother's insidious, guileful betrayal is as bad as if she's cheated on him with another man. Indeed, he believes it's far worse. My father takes my hand in his, squeezing it tightly. "I told you, sweetheart, I will take care of everything for you. You haven't got a thing to worry about." "You're not going to leave Mum, are you?" My eyes tear up. "You're not going to divorce her 'cause of me?" "Sweetheart, I don't know if I can possibly forgive her for going behind my back like this and organising this abortion. How can I overlook this treachery? It's not something I can easily forgive. After you fell pregnant, I saw a dark side in your mother that has opened my eyes to a blackness and hardness in her heart, and I don't think I can stay with a woman like that." "But Daddy, don't judge her too hard. She was doing what she thought was best for me." "No, sweetheart. Your mother was only thinking about herself. This has nothing to do with you or me. It has nothing to do with our personal feelings about abortion. This is all about what your mother wants for herself. She's not thinking about our grandchild. She's not thinking about you. And she's not thinking about me. All your mother is concerned about is herself." So yes, looking back, there were ultimately things I would do differently, if given another chance, that is. For a start, my pregnancy was the cause of my parents' divorce. I felt entirely responsible for the marital breakdown. After I fell pregnant, my parents were at each other's throats non-stop. When my mother went behind my father's back to take me to the abortion clinic, that was the final straw. My father could not forgive her for that. Ironically, he said if my mother had cheated on him with another man, he would have been able to forgive her for that, but not this. Never this. This was treachery on a whole different level. as far as my father was concerned. My father separated from my mother, filing for a divorce. My mother refused to speak to me again for betraying her trust and ruining her marriage, which she claimed was my fault. My father and I moved into an apartment together in Boston. I acquired an online degree in business administration, and 8 years later I moved into a cottage my father had bought on the Oregon coast, overlooking the most exquisite panoramic beach views. My father decided when he retired he would move into that cottage, but I was welcome to live there as long as I liked. I had started my own rather successful online clothing business, which was doing remarkably well, so despite having a baby, things had managed to fit together very nicely, and on the whole I didn't have too many regrets, apart from the strained relationship between me and my mother that had not recovered. I had been estranged from her for over 8 years now, and she'd never even met her grandchild Eli. I knew moving into the cottage would be a whole new experience for me, as the idea of living by the ocean was something I gladly welcomed. My father's cottage had not come cheap, but it was a fabulous home that had been built by a building developer from Ireland who had a vast knowledge of working in brick and stone. As he told my father, he wanted to build houses that would last with secure foundations that could leave behind a legacy for future generations. You could almost imagine the cottage on the coast of Ireland. It was unique, which is why my father had bought it in the first place, and of course its perfect location. It was the last cottage on the cul-de-sac of a long beach, and where the beach ended was rocky outcrops and large embankments of trees. Our cottage was painted white, interspersed with stone walls and sash windows, and it was built on top of a hilly embankment to maximise the stunning sea views. And so from the house there was a long line of rust-proof white metal stairs that led directly down to the soft sandy beach. So going back to the very beginning of my story, it was a blissfully beautiful Saturday morning in the cottage, where I'd been living for the past 2 months. My son Eli was playing with his toy cars in the bedroom, while I was plumping up the cushions on the sofa in the open-plan living room, with floor-to-ceiling sliding doors that open out onto a wrap-around porch with wooden steps that join the metal steps to the beach below. The views over the ocean are spectacular and transfixing. The weather was fabulous this morning, the ocean blue, the sand golden and pristine, while the sound of squawking seagulls can be clearly heard as they circle the cobalt blue sky. There's a knock at the door. I open it to find a young woman with shoulder-length strawberry blonde hair and fair skin standing in the doorway. "Hello, may I come in, Miss Duncan? I'm Miss Mackenzie, Eli's third-grade teacher." "Of course," I say. "Please mind my manners. Call me Lottie. Do come in." I beckon the woman into the cottage. She looks around nervously. "Oh, Eli, he's in his bedroom," I say. "You can hear the booming sound. That's him playing with his cars. Don't worry, he'll be distracted." "And his father, is he here?" "No, he's not. I'm a single mother," I explain. She looks relieved. "I hope I'm not imposing, dropping in on you like this. I'm just rather troubled about your son recently. I feel I should come to talk to you about it, if I may. I hope I'm not interfering, but I consider every child in my class significantly important." "Is he not settling down in class? From what he's told me, he's very happy at your school. He's mentioned his lovely teacher, which I imagine is you." "No, it's nothing like that. Your son's a delight, Lottie. He's settled down exceedingly well. He's making lots of friends, and his work is very good, so I'm very pleased with his progress." I motion for her to sit down. "Can I get you a coffee?" "No, that's very kind of you to offer, but I'm not going to be here for very long." "What is all this about?" I ask. "Well, there are actually 2 things causing me a little concern. There was a strange but eloquent, very well-spoken woman visiting our school the other day, saying she was dropping off Eli his school lunch, which was peculiarly odd, as he had his lunchbox with him already. She wanted to give it to him personally and asked if she might take him out for a milkshake and bring him back to the school later. But the teacher told her that that wasn't possible, as she's not known to us personally. We don't have her listed down as an outside authorised person to pick up your son from school. We only have you and your father's name registered with us, so we couldn't oblige her. She was very upset about that." My blood runs cold. "What did she look like?" I ask. The teacher informed me, well, when I spoke to her, that she was an elegant woman, as I say, eloquent, in her 50s, wearing a tailored suit, blonde hair, and blue eyes. Rather attractive. I think that's my mother, I'm afraid. We had a fallout over 8 years ago. She hasn't met her grandson yet." "I see," said Mrs. Mackenzie, biting her lip awkwardly. "So you don't want Eli to have any contact with his grandmother, should she visit the school again? Is that what you're saying? Look, I'll try to contact my mother, to find out what's going on, I say. Not really having a clue what I should do about my mother, who I haven't spoken to in 8 years, who I've only just learnt is covertly trying to look up her grandson, a grandson she never wanted me even to birth. Now she appears to be interested in him. A little like a slap on the face, it feels like to me." "That might be a rather good idea, because it is rather awkward for Miss Turner to turn the woman away. She was very upset. Then there's another thing. Your son has been drawing horrifying pictures of a monster with a black face and yellow eyes, who he claims is visiting him every night at his window. A scary monster." Miss Mackenzie opens her purse and pulls out a picture that she has folded up, which she opens up for me and shows me. I gasp. It really is quite a scary picture, of a big black face with yellow eyes. I don't quite know what to make of it. "Has your son been claiming to have nightmares recently?" she asks me. Why do I feel like I'm being judged? "Actually, yes, he has had a couple of nightmares, I say. Well, maybe more than 2 or 3. My face flushes a bright red. I realise I'm not really paying attention to my son as much as I possibly should be. I just assumed he was having a bad dream. I mean, don't kids all have nightmares, I protest? I remember as a kid I was terrified of the dark. I'm sure his imagination is just playing tricks on him. You imagine all kinds of things when you're his age, do you not? I'm sure it's nothing to be unduly alarmed about." "Normally I'd wholeheartedly agree with you, but this isn't the first time he keeps drawing the strange face," says Mrs. Mackenzie. "He says the face visits him every night, which I find rather disturbing. Has he not mentioned this face to you at all?" "Well, he has been running into my bedroom some nights, climbing into bed with me. I've tried to take him back to his own bedroom. Yes, he did mention once or twice that there was a face at the window, but I took him to the bedroom window and showed him that there was nothing there. In truth, I thought he was making it up so that he could sleep with me. We've only been in this house for a couple of months, and kids can become rather nervous when they move to a new place. I never took his claims seriously. You think I should?" "Well, maybe you're right. Maybe it's just a nightmare," said Mrs. Mackenzie. "It's just your son is so insistent about that face at the window." After Mrs. Mackenzie has left my home, I reflect on her ominous words, and I decide to investigate the ground outside my son's window. I mean, it might be a good idea. Naturally, I'm not expecting to actually see anything. I'm certain my son is imagining all this, especially the face. Even though we live in a 2-story cottage, my son and I both sleep in adjoining bedrooms on the ground level. My son's window is 8 feet off the ground. I discover the ground underneath his window has been disturbed, as if someone has been trampling the earth beneath the window. And a horrifying thought dawns on me. Is my mother doing this to her own grandson, creeping up to his window in the middle of the night, looking in to have a look at him, with a scary mask on her face? I don't think my mother would do something so incredulous, but over the last 8 years she has become very bitter towards me and my father. I mean, she's been showing up at the school recently, looking for an excuse to meet her grandson, without even contacting me to ask me permission. So she's clearly in Oregon at the moment. Granted, the window is 8 feet off the ground, but it's not impossible for her to use a stepladder to look in at Eli. Why she would do this is nonsensical. But desperation can make people do quite crazy, outlandish, eccentric things. I mean, she's found out where Eli attends school, so she possibly knows where our cottage is. The more I think about it, the more convinced I am that my mother is trying to interact with her grandson, without my even knowing about it. Perhaps the mask she is wearing is a joke. I remember as a kid she wore this horrible monkey mask, trying to scare me and my father as a joke. Perhaps she thought her grandson would find it funny. Kids often enjoy being scared, but Eli is not one of those kids. Almost everything frightens him, even spiders and mice. So my mother wearing a mask is not actually going to charm Eli. She wants Eli to go outside with her, so she can spend some quality time with her grandson, without my knowing. I mean, this is more than a little sneaky. That evening I speak to my son. How often, Eli, do you see the face at the window? I ask him. Mrs. Mackenzie says you draw it at school a lot. It's a scary black face with yellow eyes. It's staring at me through the window, sometimes at night. It wants me to go outside because it indicates for me to follow it. It's told me its son died and he wants me to spend time with him, but I'm scared because he's very big. How do you know that, Eli? I ask him. I know. He's scary. I don't want to walk with him. A week goes by and my son doesn't have any sighting of the strange face at the window. Perhaps my mother has finally returned to Boston, I think. I've been trying to contact her, but her old cell phone number no longer exists, so I'll have to keep searching for her, as she's not on Facebook. I'm fast asleep when my son comes rushing into my bedroom. He dives into my bed with a heavy thump, landing beside me. I'm sleeping with you tonight. The horrible face is at the window again. I've been fast asleep, but the word face at the window grabs my attention. I wake up with a start. My blood is boiling. I have visions of my mother standing on a stepladder outside the window, with a mask on her face, looking in at her grandson. What the heck does she think she's doing? Has she lost leave of her senses, scaring an 8-year-old boy half to death like this? Wait until I have words with her. This outrageous behaviour has got to stop. Honestly, why doesn't she have the backbone just to admit to me that she'd like to have contact with Eli, rather than playing these nonsensical games bordering on the ridiculous? I feel very angry. I can feel the heat flushing my face. But I try my best to look calm and composed for Eli. I don't want him to sense my angst, or to suspect that anything is up. Now you stay over there, sweetheart, I tell my son. Mummy won't be long. I'm just going outside for a second. I dash over to my closet, throw on a pair of sneakers, grab my dressing gown, and surreptitiously sneak to the living room, gently pushing open the sliding door, which luckily opens generously without a squeak. I stealthily creep to the side of the house, but there's no one outside my son's window. I catch a brief sighting of a black shadow racing down the metal staircase, moving like the wind towards the beach. It's dark to make anything out clearly. The moon is not generous tonight. It's momentarily obscured by cloud cover, so my visibility is not good at all. But returning to the house to retrieve a torch will be using up valuable time I cannot afford to waste. I know my mother can run fast. I need to catch up with her. These silly games simply have to stop. I dart down the metal staircase as fast as I can. I see the dark, shadowy silhouette moving across the beach. The problem is things are so tenebrous I can't see a thing, which is very upsetting and distressing. There's a cool breeze fanning against the shore, whipping up the air, which showers my face with a series of cold draughts. I can hear the waves tossing and crashing and thrashing against the rocky outcrops and swishing across the soft beach sand in its rhythmic backwards and forwards motion. I smell the pronounced salt in the air and distinguish the lumpy, dense, towering vertical silhouettes of the trees and rocky outcrops in the furthest distance. I don't think my mother knows I'm following her. She's walking, slowing down quite considerably. I can't make out her figure very precisely, but I guilefully use the advantage of the whistling wind to sneak up behind her without her noticing. For some reason she seems rather big. I feel something banging my leg from the side pocket of my dressing gown, and discover it's a tiny torch which I retrieve. "Mum," I call out when I'm 6 feet behind her. "I know it's you, Mum." My mother turns around. I realise with horror, with my torchlight thrown into what I assume is my mother's face, that this is not my mother. This is a Bigfoot. I know this as I've seen a programme about them before, but never once did I suspect for a single moment that such a spurious creature could actually be real. But this is not my mother in a mask. This is the real deal. I'm astonished. This is a creature, the very creature that has been looking in my son's window, I suspect. The creature is standing there staring at me, with deep-set dark eyes that give off a yellow eyeshine. I don't know who is more bewildered or shocked, me or the Bigfoot. Quite honestly, how do I react to this creature? How do you react when you're staring at something you never knew actually existed? This creature is easily over 8 foot tall, which would explain why he could look straight into my son's bedroom at night. He's easily over 700 pounds and is solidly built, with gargantuan shoulders, overlong arms, and a head that tapers to a tip. I'm astounded by the humanness of his face, although he is covered with long flowing dark hair, the colour of a blue-black ink. I know I should be affrighted by this intimidating, statuesque, imposing, lofty creature, but he doesn't look mean. His eyes are bewildered in seeing me, yes, that's true, but there is a kind intelligence in his eyes, a depth of understanding. I'm looking at the creature, wondering how I can communicate with him. I need him to comprehend that he's scaring my son. I'm sorry, I say, but you're scaring my son. Don't look at him through his window. It does upset him. The creature continues to look at me. He nods, as if he really does understand what I'm saying. But there's a sad disappointment in his eyes. I hear the words, "I mean you no harm. I lost my son. Your son reminds me of my son. Similar energy they have." Did I really hear that, I wonder? I feel a sadness for him. If he has lost his son, that's terrible. I can't imagine what that must be like. I watch him as he glides away down the beach. The cloud cover shifts over the moon. I see the silhouette of the Bigfoot moving away. He swings his arms backwards and forwards, turning around for a brief second to look at me again. I wave at him. Surprisingly, he does exactly the same. I throw my sneakers off my feet, walking through the soft beach sand, smiling to myself. I've only just encountered a Bigfoot, I realise, and the gravity of such a momentous encounter hits me hard. I hope he understood what I said about my son. But even if he didn't, I've met him now. I know he's not a mean creature, and I'm secure in the knowledge that he's benevolent. But I'm almost certain he spoke to me. That couldn't have been my imagination, could it? It didn't sound like my internal voice. Needless to say, the Bigfoot never returns to my son's bedroom window again. But I do find a pretty stone on the window pane, which I give to my son, which for some reason I absolutely know is for him. I can't help wondering if it belonged to his lost son. I think it might have. Maybe it's his way of saying sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. I really think he understood my words. Maybe he could read my mind. I'm not sure. I was able to locate my mother, only to find that she had also moved to the Oregon coast. She wanted to be near her grandson. Can you believe that? I arranged to meet her at a coffee shop to discuss her grandchild with her. In truth, having not seen her for over 8 years was rather intimidating for me. But I knew for Eli's sake and for mine it was significantly important to fix the damaged bridge between us that needed to be repaired, and forgiveness was clearly required to fix all the rifts. My mother is sitting there at the coffee shop on the pier. It's been 8 years, but it feels like yesterday, as we both burst into tears and run into each other's arms. My mother reaches out to squeeze my arm. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Sorry for everything. Especially the day when I sneakily whisked you off to that abortion clinic behind your dad's back. And in hindsight, if there's anything I'm glad about, that is that you didn't take those bloody tablets. If you did, I wouldn't have a grandson, and you wouldn't have a son. I don't hold it against you, Mum. I get it. I was 16 years old, so young. You thought I was ruining my life. I'm just sorry that I caused your marriage to break down. I brought that on myself, darling. I knew what your father's opinions were on abortion, so going behind his back meant I destroyed the trust between us. He couldn't forgive me for encouraging you to terminate your pregnancy. But I can't forgive myself for what I did, and that's even worse. Well, I forgave you a long time ago, Mum. It's water under the bridge now. Thank you, darling. I do appreciate that. I do apologise for being so furious with you, for telling your dad about what I'd done. But I brought that all on myself, did I not? Now, more to the point. Tell me, do you give me permission to have a relationship with my grandson? Because if the truth be told, there's nothing more that I'd like in the world. Of course, I say. It's a pleasure. It's every grandmother's right to know their grandson. To cut a long story short, my mother now lives and works in Oregon. She's actively involved in Eli's life. She absolutely adores her grandson and will do absolutely anything for him. My father has become firm friends with her over the years, so that the family can be together at Christmas and Thanksgiving. But they are both now seeing new people. I've been married for 5 years myself, and I'm expecting my first baby in June, another boy, so it's a brother for Eli. I've seen the Bigfoot on the beach late one afternoon. We looked at each other from about 6 feet away. Our eyes met. The words came into my head. Happy now. I have another boy. He then waved at me and glided away. He's such a likeable fellow, who possibly just wanted to interact with Eli, because he reminded him of the boy he lost. But I'm so glad that fate has blessed him with another son. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, sometimes a random, capricious thing can happen that will change the whole trajectory of your life. You'll find yourself venturing down an inadvertent path you never envisaged for yourself, when a serendipitous, perfect alignment of unpremeditated events seems to nudge you like a large tap on your shoulders that urges you to look beyond your limited elucidation of what you may have previously predetermined for your life, opening up doors for you of opportunity that you never knew actually existed, which is ultimately what happened to me. In truth, I thought I would dutifully follow in my mother's footsteps when I grew up. She was a wildlife veterinarian, while my father was an artist. The accomplished abilities that had blessed my father's life so illustriously, I regret to say, had not peppered my life with even a scattering of talent in that inspirational creative direction. By contrast, my mother's job working with wild animals harnessed within me an appealing intrigue. I loved wildlife, especially the wildlife that regularly frequented our property, from bighorn sheep, moose, elk, and American black bears. My father sold much of his artwork at the Golden Mountain Art Gallery in Telluride, where people can buy local art or even pieces of interesting creative furniture at the art gallery there, which is exceedingly popular with visitors and local tourists who thoroughly enjoy snatching reminiscent memories of the arresting mountain views here by purchasing a memento that encompasses some of the experiences they had visiting our town. Many artists come to our part of the world to paint the exquisite mountain scenery here, which is jaw-droppingly beautiful and very inspirational. We have lots of art galleries here in town, an arts festival and an arts walk, which is one of the main reasons my parents settled in this part of the world, as for an artist living in an area of prepossessing beauty is exceedingly significant when it comes to inspiring the spontaneous flow of those creative juices that, like anything in life, need to be stimulated, much like a farmer I personally know, who uses both Beethoven and Bach music to increase the milk yield from his cows, and he swears blind that it actually works, and I believe him. Unsurprisingly, our remarkable town has earned a prominent acclaimed reputation of being one of the most picturesque mountain towns in North America, with phenomenal awe-inspiring ski slopes. The town of Telluride is nestled in the heart of Box Canyon. It's a Victorian coal mining town, with a long history behind it, tainted by a deep, cloying sadness that can sometimes be tangibly felt, even if only for a brief moment, as if the souls of the long since departed do not want to ever be forgotten, for a plague so deadly and unkind in its indiscriminate haste to seize the lives of so many that swept across this town, eclipsing over 10% of the populace living here at the time. For many towns steeped in a rich, robust history, you certainly can feel the profound energy of this prepossessing town, which only adds to the charm and character of this place. And there have been numerous ghost sightings in our part of the world, of some of these lost souls that some claim have no knowledge that they're actually dead. There's an old lady, Mrs. Bott, I know, who lives here in an old coal miner's home, which she recently renovated. The renovation seemed to incite a great deal of paranormal activity. One night she woke up to feel someone tapping her on the shoulder. Mrs. Bott was wondering why there was a woman wearing a burgundy Victorian dress standing at the end of her bed that appeared as vividly alive as you or me. The distressed woman asked her, "Have you seen my daughter? Have you seen my daughter? I can't find her anywhere." Mrs. Bott shook her head and said, "Sorry, no, I haven't." She felt very sorry for the woman. It was clear she was rather distressed. The Victorian woman walked through the wall and disappeared before Mrs. Bott could ask her how she'd actually entered the house. The next morning Mrs. Bott woke up, convinced it had all been a dream. But the same event occurred over and over again, night after night without fail. Finally Mrs. Bott told the woman, "I think you're dead." But the apparition looked at her and said,
What are you talking about? I'm very much alive. She still claims she hears a Victorian woman sobbing as she looks for her child, who Mrs. Bott believes succumbed to the plague. So yes, you can say the history of our town can be easily felt and distinguished by the discerning of heart who live here. I was born in a ranch-style home, not far from the town of Telluride, and my incredulous story that propelled my life down an unlikely path began when I was only 12 years old. The ranch-style home where we lived overlooked the most expansive viridescent field, scattered in areas with clusters of aspens and pines. One thing that is extraordinary about Colorado is our incredible sunsets here. As anyone who lives here will tell you, they're mesmerizing, but can be as variable and unpredictable as the weather, for the sky will adorn itself with clouds of colour that are never ever the same, which is the perfect opportunity for an artist to transform a mountain view into a resplendent, colourful art piece that almost has a contemporary twist to it, due to the fabulous splattering of colour that randomly splashes itself across the sky. One day you might have an aquamarine sky with white fluffy clouds that have quite literally turned bright orange. Another day you might have a yellow gold sunset. Another time the sky may be a dramatic blue with purple clouds and a hint of pink. It's never the same, which is what makes our sunsets uniquely special here. The day that changed my life started like any other normal day on the American calendar, where I embraced the same routines as I did any other day of the week. It was late afternoon, when the day was beginning to settle down, to soon invite the evening to take charge of the sky. I was studiously doing some homework on the walnut desk in our living room. I was always a disciplined child, realizing the significance of acquiring excellent grades at school from a long-term perspective, as my mother was quick to point out that if I acquired great grades, every door would be open to me in the future when I went to university. That day I remember all the sounds, smells, and visual stimuli as if it was yesterday, as anything that dramatically impacts your life indelibly will never leave your mind, as it has not abandoned mine. I can look back on the details of that day with an eloquence of note that is nothing short of impressive. My mother was cooking spaghetti and meatballs in the kitchen. The savoury scent of tomato sauce infused with basil and oregano wafted around our home. Even I lifted up my head from my work for a moment, as I smelt the delicious savoury rich flavours that invited a familiar grumbling in my stomach, reminding me that I hadn't eaten for a while, and that the Italian food smelt awfully good. My mother was at the stove with her apron over her jeans. She was singing to herself, something her mother had always taught her to do, as she claimed singing over the food always blessed it. My father had come inside the house from a full day spent in his art studio. His art studio was a building separate to the house, consisting of a sizable open-plan room with large floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking fabulously beautiful country views, where he would work all day long. The floor was covered in a plethora of paint splashes, and was like the most phenomenal piece of modern art itself. On one wall he had piles of white canvases of different sizes, prepared, ready to use. On the other side he had completed works of art, and he also had long tables covered in blotches of spilled paint. He had a couple of large easels, and a cabinet where he stored all his paint mediums. One of his tables was covered in paintbrushes and palette knives of every conceivable shape and size. My father was a very versatile artist. He could paint in a variety of mediums, but he thoroughly enjoyed working with oils the most, and loved painting both contemporary and realistic art. On this particular occasion he was wearing an old pair of faded jeans and a sweatshirt. I noticed his face looked fatigued, his blonde hair ruffled. There was sweat on his brow. He walked to the small wooden bar area in our living room and retreated behind the counter, bending to open the mini fridge, where he removed a craft beer. He sighed wearily with exhaustion from an arduous day of work that he'd spent behind a huge canvas. I look up from my work to give him a smile, as me and my father were both men of few words. He places his beer can on the coffee table and sinks back comfortably into the couch, He pours his beer in a glass and takes a long swig.
"Ah, now that is good," he says. "Very, very good. Just what I needed. I'm completely spent. And doesn't your mother's tomato sauce smell delicious? I'm starting to get rather hungry," he says, rubbing his stomach.
"How's the painting going, Dad?" I ask.
Very well, says my father. "I'm incredibly pleased with the yellow of the angelfish. I've finally got the right shade of yellow. It's a lot of adjustment to get absolutely right, but it's well worth it."
My father's been assigned a marvellous commission from a North American restaurant that wants him to paint an aquatic scene for the back of the restaurant, so that it looks like one wall is devoted to being a huge, authentic fish tank with sharks, stingrays, and exotic-looking fish swimming around in the water. There's just one catch. They want the piece to look so three-dimensional, vividly real, so much so that you actually feel that you're dining in a restaurant with a scintillating real-life aquarium. So while you eat your baked fish, you feel you're by the ocean, or at least it evokes the impression within you that you're by the ocean. This art piece is enormous. It looks incredible, with colourful fish like the candy basslet, the clarion angelfish, zebrafish, lionfish, and so much more. The piece is breathtakingly detailed. It takes your breath away, without exaggeration. It has the effect that the fish look like they're actually moving in the water. I knew when it was finished there would be people who would dine at that restaurant, falsely assuming that there was an aquarium at the back. And that was what the restaurant manager wanted them to think. That was the general idea of this project. They knew installing a real-life aquarium would be an excessive expenditure that they could ill afford. So this idea was quite literally the next best thing. My father glances out of the floor-to-ceiling windows in our living room, and despite his incredible fatigue, his exhaustion seizes the moment. His tiredness is temporarily postponed, as upon seeing the sunset, the artist inside him cannot be restrained or subdued. For a moment he stands still, and then he points to the horizon.
"Son, get moving quickly. I want you to take some photographs for me with that camera," he says to me. "I can't miss this sunset."
I glance out of the window and observe the red sun setting on top of the mountain, and in the waning light the sky is ablaze with a soft salmon pink that melts so seamlessly into an ocean of pinks and purples, and this all-encompassing light changes the tones and shades of the colours that align the foothills, so that the vibrancy of every tree is enriched in its intensity. I glance over my homework and put my work down. This is one jaw-dropping beautiful sunset. In truth, possibly one of the most magnificent sunsets I have ever yet beheld. On this occasion, my father is swift and efficient. In a trice he's grabbed his camera, thrusting it quickly in my hands.
"Go into the meadow and take as many pictures as you can of this sunset, son, from every angle, against the backdrop of the mountains that are dappled in varying shades of purple due to the natural light effects of the setting sun that's casting its shadows across the firmament."
My father thrusts back the sliding doors and walks out onto the wraparound porch. There's always an easel at the ready, along with a box of oil paints and a glass of brushes, for moments like this when the sunset has to be snatched from the sky as quickly as possible, before it finally fades, sinking behind the valley, dissipating and receding until it's gone. My father works quickly in moments like these, to create a rough impression of the sky. I watch him as his paintbrush, dipped with salmon pink paint, is vigorously working the canvas with a savvy efficiency, his focus so intense that if there was an elephant in the room, he probably wouldn't even notice. I can see his excitement. It's palpable. His forehead gleams with sweat. His one leg taps excitedly on the wooden floor, as if all the nervous energy he feels has been confined to just one area of his body, while his steady fingers remain studiously devoted to his craft, without even one single twitch. I think my father's hands are like that of a masterful athlete. They're incredibly nimble. I stand in the knee-high grass, interlaced with profusions of colourful spring flowers. I start snapping the sunset from every angle in the meadow, with the powerful lens of my father's professional camera. There's a cool, invigorating breeze blowing. I walk through the wavering grass. It seesaws in the direction that the wind is blowing. It either blows backwards or forwards, like the vertical strands of a woman's long silky hair. The strong minty and peppery scents of pine infuse the air, while the gentle wind kisses and caresses my cheeks. I walk towards the towering, lofty oak tree, to take a shot of the tree against the billowing mountains, accented so resplendently by this ravishing sunset. I think this could be a great landscape piece for my father's work. This is a statuesque oak tree that majestically stands on its own at the far end of the field, like a towering lighthouse at sea. My eyes are drawn to the highest branches of this tree, towards an eagle's nest nestled between two branches, shaped into a huge bowl, with branches and twigs woven together. I know this is a favourite tree with eagles. They love to nest in an area that enables them to see the landscape for miles around them, and this tree fits the bill perfectly, as the tree has many top branches completely devoid of leaves. On this occasion I can hear the chirruping commotion going on in the nest between the fledglings, as if they're fighting. I'm staring in awe at the nest. The parents aren't around at the moment. All of a sudden something comes flying out of the nest and begins to drop. I instinctively, by way of my natural reflexes, catch it before it smacks onto the ground. It's a baby eagle. Oh my God, there's a baby eagle in my hands. If I hadn't caught it in time, it might be dead. The eagle is opening up its beak, as if it's expecting me to feed it. I run up the wooden steps of the wraparound porch, past my father painting assiduously at his easel. I run into the living room. He asks me, "What's going on, son? What's the rush about?" But I ignore him. I charge down the passage towards the kitchen, where my mother is draining spaghetti into a large colander, and the steam is rising up in the air. "Mum, I've got an eagle. I caught it. It was falling out of a nest. What should we do?" My mother stops dead in her tracks. Her blue eyes grow wide. She abandons the pasta and races over to my side to examine the fledgling. "Well, he looks pretty healthy, does he not?" she says, examining the fluffy bird with its wide open beak that is begging for food. "He's obviously hungry." We place the fledgling in a towel, which we insert in a large beer cooler, which we line with some timber beams to create the impression of a nest. And with a large pair of tweezers we feed the little eaglet pieces of raw chicken. The bird's beak is always open. It has an insatiable hunger. My mother tells me the other fledglings possibly picked on him, threw him out of the nest because he was the weakest eaglet. "It's what they do to survive," she explains. "It's nature. It's a cruel thing, I know. Survival of the fittest." The other fledglings had thrown him out of the nest. She looks at me through her blue eyes. "Life is funny," she says. "Why were you next to the tree, at the exact moment in time when the little eaglet almost fell to its death?" "What are you saying, Mum?" I ask. "I'm saying that this little eaglet was not meant to die. Maybe you were meant to save it. Stranger things have happened." And so began my journey of raising an eaglet. And with my mother's help as a veterinarian, she made absolutely sure that I was giving it the right amount of food, as this little eaglet was always hungry. While I was at school, I had phoned my father to remind him to feed my eaglet, something that infuriated him greatly, as he was so caught up in his artwork. But I knew I needed to phone him, or my eagle would go hungry. My dad would likely become so embroiled in his work, he would overlook feeding my bird. He soon grew very fond of the tenacious bird, who soon became a subject of many of his paintings. My eaglet grew up to become a fine-looking golden eagle. He would perch on my shoulders, sometimes nibbling my ear affectionately. I would walk around the house, and without much help from us, he instinctively began to fly around the house. At first he was clumsy, but soon he began to fly gracefully all on his own, from the refrigerator to the settee, and then to the high rafters on our ceilings, where he would perch and watch us going about our business. I called my eagle Squawking. I'd release him in the yard after school for his daily exercises. He would fly from one tall tree to another, sometimes soaring up into the sky, flying around in circles, his large wings outstretched, as he sailed with the wind, as if surfing the clouds. Then, like clockwork, he always returned to the safety and security of my shoulders. Sometimes he'd follow my father's car all the way to school and back home again, and many people were amazed to see an eagle flying above our car. Squawking was an exceedingly intelligent bird. I think he saw me as his parent, and was reluctant to let me go, as we had formed an unlikely bond. Sometimes he'd ride on the back of our golden retriever, his claws pulling at Noah's long blonde hair. Even our golden had developed an attachment to the bird, despite the fact that Squawking was forever pulling out his hair. But Noah didn't seem to mind that. When Squawking was fully grown, I encouraged him to fly away, but he'd always come back to me. He seemed to hesitate about flying away. I think he stayed longer with me than he should have on my account, as I think he knew underneath it all, leaving me for good would make me very sad, and he sensed that. Sometimes he would be gone for a day or two, and then would return. I was always relieved to see him when he came back, as there was a huge part of me that didn't want to let him go, as we had such an incredible bond. But one day Squawking was gone, and he never came back, and that had to be the saddest day of my life. It was curious, as on the day that he left, I knew he was gone for good. I don't even know where this inner revelation actually came from, but I knew he was gone. I will admit it did break my heart that he had flown away, but my mother assured me that this was the best thing that could have ever happened, and that this was a successful release to the wild. "No, it's not," I protested, fighting back the sad, devastated tears that spilled down my cheeks. "You don't get it, Mum. I loved Squawking. We had such a connection." "Now you listen to me," said my mother, cradling me lovingly in her arms, "and you listen to me hard. You raised Squawking from a fledgling. Without you, he would definitely have died. Eagles are an endangered species. You rescued a remarkable eagle that will sire other eagles of its own. Your kindness towards Squawking has increased the eagle population. You should be exceedingly proud of your achievements." She pauses for a moment and says, "You never know. He might come back to visit you one day." I clung on to that hope for dear life, like a surfer out on a tempestuous sea, clinging to his surfboard with all his might. Suffice to say, 2 years went by. I had resigned myself to the fact that Squawking was never ever going to come back. My heart was heavy and very remorseful. It was like losing an animal that had passed away, that you thought you'd never ever get to see again. Then one day Noah, my dog, is barking excitedly, pawing the glass pane of our sliding doors, as if he's seeing someone he knows. His tail is wagging. He's desperately excited. "What's up, boy?" I ask him. "What you excited about?" I pull back the sliding door. I see Squawking perching on the wooden balustrades of our patio. For a moment, time stands still. The moment is surreal. I have to pinch myself. My throat becomes thick with emotion. Tears of joy build up in my eyes. And I say, "Squawking! Squawking, is that you?" Without even an ounce of hesitancy, the affectionate eagle flies over to me, perching on my shoulders, nibbling my ears, as if he hasn't been away at all. I notice he's grown into the most awesome, awe-inspiring bird. I realize in that moment that Squawking is never, ever going to forget me. In the years that follows, he visits my parents' home for 14 more years, sometimes bringing along his female mate, until I assume he has passed away, because he visits us no more. But one day my parents find a single eagle feather on the patio, but there is no sign of Squawking. I will say this, that golden eagle Squawking impacted my life so dramatically that he dictated my life path. So maybe some fortuitous events are not that accidental after all. I'm now 35 years old, married with children of my own, still living outside my hometown of Telluride, where I grew up as a young boy. My wife is a ski instructor for winter sports in the area, teaching beginners how to ski. As the great thing about our ski slopes in this part of the world is that they accommodate skiing opportunities from the advanced to the beginner. I'm now doing a census for eagle populations around North America, as squawking's presence in my life opened the doors for me to study eagles around the globe, their nesting habitats, their populations, and so forth. I have received information recently from a local cattle rancher in the area who's raising grass-fed beef. He's reported 2 golden eagle sightings. They're nesting on a very large oak tree that is situated on the edge of a meadow, overlooking the mountains and vast stretches of open fields. The rancher has given me personal permission to camp on his property, to film and study the golden eagles. There is one fleeting thought at the back of my mind. Could these eagles be carrying Squawking's DNA? I do hope so. Do you have to go? My wife complains. She hates it when I amble off to study eagles, but as this is a local habitat, she feels it's unreasonable for me to camp at a location overnight. But she fails to comprehend that I certainly need to record everything about the eagles from the moment the dawn breaks until the sun sets. I need to see it all.
Sorry, sweetheart, but I can't miss out on an opportunity like this, I tell her.
I drive my 4-wheel drive to this Colorado cattle ranch, climbing out of my vehicle to open and close the large cattle gate behind me. All my camping gear is in the back of my truck. The dusty road is plagued by heavy stones and rocks. The jolty journey down this precipitous driveway does little to dishearten the bubbling effervescence that is rising within me. My heart is flapping with enthusiastic excitement, as eagles are my biggest passion, and watching eagles in the wild feeding their chicklets or soaring up into the cobalt blue sky with wings outstretched is something that I can never tire of. When I was a young boy and I watched my father so caught up in his art, with such a zealous passion, that even his family faded away in the background, as he became one with the canvas, so lost in the moment, that hours to him would seem like mere minutes, food and drink not even a fleeting momentary thought, when hunger pangs reared their ugly head, audaciously commanding his consideration, their growling tenacious voices were never heard. At that time I envied his dedication to his work, wondering if I could ever be so swept up with such a passionate zeal, like a balloon caught up in the wind, so even the relentless growls of a hungry stomach would forget to engage my focus. I thought that would be an impossibility, given that I'm a man who thoroughly enjoys good food, and as our town is renowned for its extraordinary cafes and restaurants with dishes on the menu like our famous craft pizza or pork belly tacos that aren't easily forgotten, I thought it would be unlikely to happen to me. But how wrong I was. Ostensibly, when I developed a fire in the belly for eagles, my steadfast predilection escalated, growing wings as large as the wingspan of an eagle itself, so that I was lost in my infatuation for these majestic birds, with all other senses expunged from me. So much like my father, the practicalities of my life were cast aside, and even my preoccupation with food took a back seat, which I'm sure my waistline really appreciated. I drive down the long dusty road, the occasional stone pelting precariously against the undercarriage of my truck. On either side of this white dusty road are undulating fields and hills that sparkle with a viridescent green grass, brushed occasionally with scatterings of trees clustered together in congenial groups. In the furthest distance, plastered against the sky like an ethereal suggestion, are the billowing shapes of the craggy mountains that under the huge cobalt blue sky are almost like a white silhouette, their rugged, chiselled but jagged constellations dappled with blue and purple specks. In the meadows, reddish-brown cattle are grazing, but glance up when they see my truck. My truck rolls towards a parkland expanse, where, nestled in the heart of the valley, is a large ranch-style farmhouse built of stone and wood, their outbuildings, stable blocks and workshops. The quintessential Colorado cowboy comes out of the house wearing a pair of blue jeans and a large belt with a big buckle, cowboy boots and a cowboy hat. "Howdy," he says to me, tapping his hat. "Pleased to meet you. The name's Coleman Harris, and you are Tucker, I believe." "That's right," I say. "You're here about the golden eagles." He looks at me and chuckles. "You've got it bad, I can see. A passion is written all across your face, but I get it, I really do.
Those birds, oh my word, those birds are magnificent. Spotted them myself a few days ago. They've nested opposite a wood grove on a single very tall oak tree against a rocky outcrop. I noticed them there when riding my barn sour. What's that? I asked. Oh, he chuckles. Sorry, it's cowboy lingo for a horse that is a homebody and enjoys hanging around the barn. The place is at the rear of my ranch. Would you like me to drop you off there in my truck? That would be most kind. Are you sure you don't mind me camping out there near the eagle's nest? Of course not. Why do you think I called you? You're more than welcome to study them any time you like. I do hope they're back there next year.
Coleman drops me off at the edge of a large, sumptuous wood grove. He points towards two towering, majestic, lofty-looking oak trees, standing together like old, mature, friendly giants against a large, rocky, rugged outcrop, devoid of any vegetation, and bearing a remarkable resemblance to a canyon. The trees possess imposing tall boughs, naked and stripped of any leaves, stretching out like a man engaged in a huge yawn who's reaching for the heavens with his large arms. In between two branches, shaped together like a large fork, missing the two internal prongs, is a nest made up of thick pieces of timber, aligned in the huge shape of a bow. The nest is over there, he whispers. I look up into the sky and see two masterful eagles gliding above us, their wings outstretched. I can feel the tears building up at the back of my eyes, as stirring, poignant memories tug at my heartstrings as I think of my friendship with Squawking. I thank the friendly rancher for all his help. I watch him driving away, while I wave to him. His heavy rubber wheels of the truck are siphoning up a tsunami of white dust that hangs in the air for several minutes, making breathing rather unpleasant. I hitch up my tent on a clearing, heavily fringed by trees from the rear. I'm about 70 feet away from two bare oak trees at the far end of the meadow, where the eagles are nesting, but I consider myself camped far away enough as not to be a botheration to the eagles. But from this position, using my field glasses, I'll be able to watch them closely. I'm glad to say that although both parents have observed me, they seem unfazed by my presence. I hope that these eagles will become more familiarized and acquainted with me over the next couple of days, as I study them curiously and take lots of notes. I retreat into the heart of the wood grove with a large water bottle in my hand, which I intend to fill at the water's edge. The wood grove is spectacular. It's like walking into a cool sanctuary, bejewelled with towering trees, most of which are indigenous to Colorado, like ponderosa pines, Douglas firs, bristlecone pines, and blue spruces. When I walk through the wood grove, there's a rambunctious stream zigzagging impatiently over the sculptural rocky outcrops, where the tenacious jets of water relentlessly blast over the rocks at a feisty speed, so that it foams with bubbles of white water, bounding through the valley like a speed train that has an urgent schedule it has to meet. I walk cautiously towards the water, lowering my bottle into the shallow end of the stream to fill it. I can't shake off the disturbing, airy feeling that I'm being watched. I look around me, but I just see towering trees, along with a belly of verdant undergrowth that sprouts up among the trees like a tangled thicket of foliage and grasses. But I don't see anything else. But why is it that I keep feeling as if something is watching me? All is still beyond the sound of the water crashing against the rocks. I surreptitiously retreat back to my tent, trudging somewhat clumsily down a pronounced rugged earthen trail, interlaced with jutting rocks, covered with dense tree litter, some of it rather spongy under my feet. I glance warily over my shoulders, rather bewildered to discover that my heart is doing flip-flops, compounded by a nauseous feeling rising up from my belly, leaving behind a revolting bitter aftertaste on my tongue. There's a whispering certainty that rises like a wind inside me, haunting my thoughts, jabbing my instincts. I'm certain I'm being studied, possibly even stalked. But is my imagination teasing and ridiculing me, leading my mind astray with misleading suggestions that bear no comparison or relevance with reality. Have my senses completely abandoned me? I think I hear feet padding behind me, heavy, ponderous feet. But when I turn around, there is nothing there. I must be grievously mistaken. There is nothing there at all. What on earth is wrong with me? I gather stones around the clearing to create a perfectly circular fire pit. Soon the red-orange bright dancing flames are spitting, sparking, curling and folding as they burn the dry twigs up with a robustious, impassioned enthusiasm, while a pot of water sings merrily as it boils. I make some tea with powdered milk and sugar, which I drink in a metal mug. It tastes so good, as tea invariably does, in the open. I have my field glasses at the ready, pinned on watching the golden eagles, with talons clawing onto branches, as they scan the vast wilderness, with their astute golden eyes, like two night watchmen, guarding a fort with a punctilious valour. One eagle is tearing strips of meat off a dead animal, feeding 3 hungry fledglings. It's quite a sight to behold. Those fledglings look exactly like Squawking did in those early days when I first rescued him. Like Squawking, they have insatiable appetites that are not easily satisfied. I discern the red sun balancing on the highest ramparts of the mountain, and in its waning light the foothills appear to be ablaze. A cool breeze blows down out of the sun, fanning through the tall dry glass, which streams like waves of golden fire along the slopes towards the rich and shadowed valley. In the knee-high grass I watch the shadowy silhouettes of the tall oak trees as their sculptural boughs begin to fade into obscurity. They become eclipsed by a tenebrous darkness that has settled on the horizon, made a little less intimidating by the vast scattering of stars and the shimmering pearly moon. That night I retired to my snug sleeping bag, with an exhilarated, enthused anticipation of what the next morning will hold. During the night I wake up with a start. I hear 2 voices engaged in what seems like an argument of some kind. It's really rather bizarre, as I'm far away from the main farmhouse, and as far as I know there shouldn't be any humans out there. I feel rather befuddled. I try to listen more intently to the voices. It sounds as if 2 people are speaking in a foreign tongue. I decide to investigate. I wasn't afraid, not even remotely. I was more curious. I crawl out of my tent on my hands and knees, after throwing on a pair of sneakers. It is when I realise that the voices are coming from inside the woodgrove that I feel slightly intimidated, rather reluctant about entering a space where in the shadow of darkness anything could be hiding, from mountain lions to coyotes, neither of which I am eager to encounter. The voices become more high-pitched, and the human sound begins to arouse my interest more. Are there people in the woodgrove? And if so, what are they doing there at this time of night? In a trice, an ebullient burst of inquisitive impertinence that cannot be suppressed seems to propel my feet steadily down the woodland trail, guided by the light of my torch, along with the soft silvery moonlight that filters through the trees. As I get closer to the voices, I switch off my torch, slipping clandestinely behind a tree to take cover. Then I see them. There are no words I can find to describe my bewilderment, as for a moment I thought as if I was suspended in an alternative reality. I was staring at 2 female Bigfoot, one whom had obviously found my cowboy hat, that I'd left hanging on a tree branch and forgotten all about. It was clear they were arguing over who should have ownership of the cowboy hat. It was very funny to watch, as arms were oscillated and pointed, accusations launched at each other, and this was all over my cowboy hat. If you had told me 5 minutes earlier, before this Bigfoot sighting, that these creatures were real, I would have laughed in your face. Now humility prevailed upon me, and shame accompanied it as its humble companion. I had so audaciously dismissed the idea that these creatures could exist, but now I knew with certainty that Bigfoots were real. My sense of wonder was profound. Indeed, I was so stunned that for a moment no thoughts about my safety even wafted into my mind. It was so gripping to watch these incredible creatures that I was lost in the moment. Both of these female Bigfoots were easily over 7 foot tall, They could have been a mother and daughter or two sisters. I can't be sure about that. They were powerfully built, with impressive, sturdy, robust builds, overlong arms and pyramid-shaped heads that folded seamlessly into the shoulders, so it almost looked as if there was no neck. The faces of these two creatures were uniquely individual, but they were very human, with high cheekbones and deep-set dark eyes. They were covered in dark hair. I knew they were female, not only based on their voices, but also by the fact that both these creatures had small pert breasts. I was lucky as the light of the moon danced through the open canopy, and in certain lights I got a clear view of these creatures. The two Bigfoots, when they fought, were not really physical, except for expressing their outrage when they oscillated their arms and expressed their indignance by chatting back and forth at each other. It really was like watching two women having a Barney. It was then I heard this incredulous huffing sound, followed by several deep guttural grunts, followed by thunderous feet that appeared to be pounding the ground so heavily that the ground almost vibrated and shook as it groaned and heaved. Branches snapped, popped and broke. Leaves rustled. The two female Bigfoots, their backs straightened immediately, like erect pencils, as they stood to attention, rather like two frightened students waiting for the headmistress to arrive. A formidable Titanic-sized male Bigfoot entered the space. He was impressive, demanding respect. Both the females stopped arguing at once. He looked from one female Bigfoot to the other, and upon realizing what the argument was about, he confiscated the hat from the one female Bigfoot. The female Bigfoot's expression dropped, registering deep disappointment, while the other female Bigfoot looked exceedingly pleased, because if she couldn't have the hat, and neither could her friend, there was no need to be jealous any more, as the hat was now in the charge of the male Bigfoot. The male examined the hat very carefully. He made some appreciative ah sounds. Obviously he recognized the quality of my hat, which, even if I say so myself, did not come cheap. The two female Bigfoots stopped arguing. They glided away, having realized the battle of the hat was now well and truly over. I began to walk away to my tent. Something tapped me on the shoulder. I nearly died on the spot, as staring directly at me was the male Bigfoot. He was the most intimidating creature I've ever beheld, easily 9 foot tall. What did he want with me? I thought I was going to die, I was so terrified. I could have literally reached out and touched him. But his eyes met mine. They were almost laughing at me. He handed me back my hat. I heard him say in my head telepathically, "Yours, I believe." He then pulled out an eagle's feather from behind his ear and said, "I was asked to give this to you, from your eagle friend." Did I really hear that? Or was that my imagination? But he popped the eagle's feather in my hand. He then turned around and glided away. I never saw any of the Bigfoots again, but now I'm a staunch believer in Bigfoot. But was the eagle feather from squawking, or one of the offspring that I was studying? I can't be sure about that. But now wherever I go, I always wear my cowboy hat with an eagle's feather. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, my sister Makendra, when she entered her early 20s, was the success story in our family, the one who knew how to twiddle her fingers and make things happen, with an audacious determination and passionate certitude, for she never vacillated, nor did she doubt in her ability to achieve anything her heart desired. But my sister's passionate zeal for life and the opportunities that life presented stirred up the green-eyed monster in my mother's heart. But my sister always remained oblivious to my mother's insatiable jealousy. Growing up, we were only a year apart in age, but I was the younger of the two of us. Every day we trudged warily home from school, in our scuffed black leather patent shoes, chafed from too much wear and tear, bedraggled, somewhat tattered clothes that had been so worn out that they hung on our skinny little bodies like old limp curtains that had seen far better days, and certainly could do well with a little starching to rather revitalize the flagging, pendulous fabric of our school uniforms. We would return home from school daily, with a buoyant skip in our step, as we were happy kids in those days,
regularly ambling down the affluent pavements of one of Seattle's charming green leafy neighborhoods, lined with statuesque honey locust trees, gracing beautiful ostentatious properties, the likes of such we could only dream of owning in our dreams, lost in the lavish furnishings of an elaborate fertile imagination, with a jolly good sense of humour. This was where the other half lived, people who weren't like us in any way, shape or form. I had come to accept this reality with a reluctant resignation. My sister would point at the illustrious, lofty, imposing properties that stood out proud and tall in our neighbourhood, and epitomised a plethora of different kinds of architecture, from Queen Anne, craftsman, to your typical ranch-style homes. But despite their unique individuality, charm, character, or even eccentricity, each house definitely was owned by people with money, and lots of it. Mackendrah would say, "One day I'm going to live in a mansion just like that. Just you wait and see." I would look at the serious, earnest expression on my sister's face. She would look resolutely determined, steadfastly assiduous, as if any doubt about the impossibility of such an outrageous suggestion had never fleetingly entertained her mind, not even for a brief second. I would never have the audacity and presumptuousness to make such outrageous claims, but for my sister Mackendrah there were no hurdles that she couldn't overcome to achieve her goals. I would shake my blonde mane of hair, that was always braided in two plaits on either side of my head doubtfully, and say with an ambiguous certitude, "Never! We could never live in a place like this." My sister would put her arm around me, give my shoulder a tight squeeze, and say, "Don't worry, Macy. You'll be able to move in with me one day. I'll take care of both you and Mum." Of course, I never believed a word of it, not for a single moment. It was all pie in the sky, fanciful thinking. How could we ever be rich? That was something that ingratiated itself towards other people whom were worthy of such indulgent privileges and entitled birthrights, which I clearly believed we were not. In those days we were attending a state school, with an excellent, formidable reputation for its brilliant teachers and high-quality first-class education. This invariably meant there were some wealthy kids that attended our school, based on the fact that it was so highly regarded, for many of their parents could easily have afforded to splash out on a private education. But why would you bother, when the state school in question had a phenomenal reputation that even outrivaled some of the private schools in the area? I could see many of the students' lives were worlds apart from ours. For a start, the school uniform they sported was not literally falling apart at the seams like ours were. If they outgrew a dress, it would be regularly replaced. They never had holes in their socks, nor did their shoes ever look deflated and worn down like ours did. But my sister Mackendrah always taught me to hold my head up high, not to feel embarrassed or humiliated about our scuffed shoes, as that would only draw attention to them. By all accounts, most of the students in our school were wealthier than us, but then that would not have been difficult to accomplish, to be richer than us, I mean, as almost everybody was. We grew up in an impoverished lifestyle, in a trailer park, where life had never been easy for us, and some of the people in that trailer park had huge issues, especially relating to substance abuse, which wasn't surprising, really. It was ironically incongruous that the trailer park was situated in a field on the edge of the woods in this upmarket neighbourhood. The field was hedged in by tall Douglas fir trees, so you couldn't see the run-down old trailers that lurked behind the trees, that were clandestinely concealed from prying eyes. It was amazing that this eyesore to the community had been unabashedly overlooked and imprudently long since forgotten about. It was buried away from plain sight, so I guess it was really more a case of being out of sight, out of mind, for what you don't see doesn't hurt you. If the residents in this prosperous community, obviously steeped in clover, had observed the sorry sight of the sullied, unprepossessing trailer park conspicuously from the road, if it hadn't been so masterfully obscured by bounteous trees that hedged in this large piece of land, there is no way in a million years it would have been sanctioned or even permitted to exist in this exclusive upmarket neighbourhood, where property prices were sky high. For a start, there would undoubtedly have been a plethora of complaints from local very posh residents who didn't want their eyes to be offended or affronted by this unsightly, besmirched blight to the neighbourhood, In truth, I doubt anyone knew about the tumble-down, uncomely trailer park that existed in our area, apart from the postman, who delivered us our post and couldn't get away from the trailer park fast enough. I'd seen how he blew in and out of the place like a fast, reluctant wind, for the frightful-looking park was certainly not easy on the eyes. It was something my sister and I never talked about, for my mother warned us if we did, the run-down, enervated trailer park would probably end up being shut down. I was so sure that one day the bulldozers would arrive on the scene to literally demolish and devour the field, to make way for a grandiose housing development, or that the landowner, who was letting out the decrepit trailers to us, would invariably just sell up, deciding it was no longer worth investing the money in the trailers that we knew were groaning from the desperate need of a new coat of paint and a touch of tender loving care. If that happened, where would we go? It was something I had nightmares about throughout my childhood. I had a terror that I'd end up in a cardboard box, living under a bridge, smelling like garbage. That troubling thought frightened the life out of me. Our landlord was a wealthy man, who let out a lot of Seattle's more seedy, disreputable, unwholesome properties to prostitutes and pimps in other, more run-down parts of the city. But in my personal opinion, nothing could have been more seedier, shabbier, or in need of greater repair than the trailer park where we had grown up as children. I remember as a young girl being bitterly ashamed and shamefully self-conscious of our underprivileged lifestyle, as there had been times when things were infinitely better for us, when the promises of an esteemed future lay ahead of us, shining down upon us brightly, the spark of its exciting potential eager to be ignited, like the firecrackers in a box that have not yet been used on the 4th of July. This dramatically different lifestyle, a future of bodacious possibilities, may have been ours for the taking, if my father had not wantonly abandoned us and disappeared from the face of the earth, never to be heard of or seen again. If we had remained in his charge, we would never have ended up living in a trailer park. Of that I am most certain. Even my mother admitted as much, with great reservation, I might add. I had discovered an abandoned photograph album of us as kids that my mother had recklessly tossed in the garbage. I had retrieved it surreptitiously under a pile of potato peelings and banana skins and cleaned the album up. It still is in my possession today. As a young girl, I tirelessly paged through the pictures of the album, depicting the 4 of us together as a family. Me, my sister Mackendra, my father and mother. We seemed like a typical happy, all-American family. I would study the pictures studiously, allowing no detail to go unchecked. It would seem in the photographs my father is always smiling. There's a broad beam on his face. Ostensibly in all my snapshots, he's interacting with us, looking every part the diligent, attentive father, totally besotted by his own children. There's one picture of me in a wheelbarrow, laughing my head off, while my father is running around in the yard, giving me a ride as he pushes the wheelbarrow around the yard. I can see my mother in the background of these photographs, wearing her pink cotton shift dress, with a thin white belt around her tiny middle, looking like a sourpuss. I know that sounds mean, but it's true. She never smiles into the camera, not back then, not even once. But then misery was her second name, and it still is today. I discern that my mother's cold, emotionless expression is rigidly stiff, her mouth locked in a downward scowl, as if she's on the outside looking in, with a dismissive regard and an apathetic indifference, exceedingly detached and disinterested in this cosy, familiar family scene the photographs encapsulate. In these idiosyncratic photographs, that seem an entire world away from our current lives, laying claim to the possibility of an alternative reality, with a family that remarkably resembles us. But it is us, and that's what I find hard to get my head around. I behold an elegant, rather cosy-looking home where we once lived. My mother never talks about that property, but I'm certain she must secretly miss the luxury it embodied. It's impossible to fathom that we lived in such a smart, middle-class-looking house once. The kind of house I would be proud to call home. A place where no shame would be recruited should I wish to invite my friends over to play. My father had been a banker, making a sizable income. One day he chose to never return home again. But why did our father leave us? I'd asked my mother, for looking at photographs it was hard to fathom he would have indiscriminately forsaken us, As in the photographs, I certainly detect a man that seemed so settled as a loving father, a devoted family man. It made no sense to me at all, and was an enigmatic mystery that bothered me very much growing up. I would lie back in my bedroom at night, staring up at the ceiling and saying, "Daddy, where are you? Why did you leave us? Why did you go away?" But I was met by a hard, sombre, unyielding wall of silence, as no answers were magnanimously forthcoming. "He couldn't stand you kids," my mother would profess, removing a cigarette from her box, from her shirt pocket, lighting it with her plastic lighter, and taking a long puff, blowing billows of smoke out into a confined space of the trailer, which would often cause us to cough and splutter. It didn't help that she smoked the strongest brand of Marlboro cigarettes. "Your father couldn't abide you children. Good riddance to bad rubbish," she spouts. "Glad to see the back of that dreadful man. If you know what's good for you, you should be glad he's not around too. We're all much better off without him." I don't know if my mother ever remembered the photograph album, which she unheedfully dumped in the dumpster, that I clandestinely recovered and covertly hid under my bed, with photographs that clearly revealed a father that definitely adored his children. It was so contradictory to the story my mother would tell us about him. I'd always known that I could never trust a word that came out of my mother's mouth. She was a compulsive liar. To her, lying came as naturally as breathing. "Oh, I will have your rent money tomorrow," she would tell our landlord over and over again. "I'm due to be paid tomorrow morning." That was always a lie. She was an artful, persuasive liar. Even when there was no need to lie at all, she would still lie for the hell of it, to make her life appear more interesting and dynamic. She would tell some of the gullible people in our trailer park that in her youthful days she had circumnavigated the globe with her obscenely wealthy parents, and visited far-flung obscure places not even depicted on a map of the world. When she was 8 years old, she had even been to Windsor Castle and had tea with the Queen of England. The weirdest part of it all is some people believed her preposterous, fanciful claims, but in truth she had never even stepped out of Seattle a single day in her life. My mother's biggest problem was her vague memory. She could never remember the lies she told, so it would often end up backfiring on her, and that almost always included the twisted lies she told me about my father. It was a given the story she had shared with me about my father was not true. The pictures, in my opinion, revealed a man that was devoted to his kids. If my father had hated children as much as my mother claimed he did, why is he the only adult in the picture interacting with us? Why does he have such a huge smile on his face from ear to ear? If any one of my parents could have been accused of being less enamoured about having children, it was my mother, for in every photograph she looks the picture of misery. I knew there was more to this incomprehensible enigma than met the eye. I couldn't fathom what had happened to my dad, or why he had ditched us as my mother professedly claimed. Something didn't add up for me. Of course, if I cross-examined my mother with questions relating to my father, it would make her become belligerently snappy. I'd see her jaw physically tense, her fingers even tremble. "Why do you want to know about a man who wanted nothing to do with you? He rejected and shunned you, for goodness sake. Why would you think about someone who's thought so little about you both, deliberately neglected and rebuffed you, so much so that he hasn't even sent you a birthday card over the years? You must forget about your father. I have, and it's the best thing I ever did, so take your lead from me." Of course, I tried to share my observations about my father with my sister Mackendra, but she wasn't interested in dwelling on the past or looking back. For her, reflecting on such things was futile and unavailing, like staring at a puddle of spilt milk that has already been cleared up and long since forgotten about. "It doesn't matter why Dad left us," she'd say. "It's inconsequential. Nor is it of any concern to me if what Mum tells us is true or not. Don't you see, Macy? It's all in the past. We can't go back in time to fix what is broken, or to change an outcome. We were too young then to comprehend what was going on at the time. We don't even remember our dad. It's now that's important, Macy. It's about looking forward, not backwards. Don't you see? That's all that really counts." I didn't see at all. I wanted to know what had happened to my father. I knew that whatever my mother said about him, possibly the opposite was true. I knew deep down in my heart that my father had adored us and would never willingly have left us. So the treasured photographs I had of him were a significant, valuable point of contact to me, rather like a cherished red letter that made me feel close to him. I perceived that he had loved us, and before I went to bed at night, I diligently would always whisper, "Dad, wherever you are, I love you." And I hoped that by articulating the words, that in some magical way they would be carried by the wind, like a floating seed, to wherever my father was, and the message would be whispered into his ears. "Remember, your daughter Macy, she really loves you. Don't ever forget that." Growing up, my mother was particularly loathsome, churlish and icky on my elder sister Mackendra, as they were opposite in every single regard. As dark is to light, as white is to black, and as good is to evil. My sanguine sister was positive, buoyantly effervescent. She was like a bright lighthouse, guiding the ships out on a tempestuous, treacherous sea, safely back to shore. She was the one with an idealistic, upbeat attitude, who always saw the cup as full, even when it was so obviously empty. "Don't worry, Mum," she would say, when she complained bitterly over our living conditions, or never having enough money, or other general challenges that life bestowed on us at the time. My sister would throw her arms around my mother effusively. "One day I'll buy us a grand house where we can all live happily together, and I'll take care of the all of us." My mother would never respond with any grateful appreciation, or hug my sister back, but she would stiffen like a straight pencil, pulling away from Mackendra with disgust, like a tortoise retreating into its shell. Mackendra seemed oblivious from the contemptuous, obnoxious regard my mother obviously held her in. I'd seen the way my mother adjudged my sister, the hostile hatred, the disapproval and disdain written in her heartless blue eyes. When my sister brought home her report cards, they were full of rapturous praise for Mackendra, with comments like, "Mackendra is a delightful pupil. She interacts in class and is always giving of her best. Her grades reflect her hard work and determination to succeed." Far from my mother being proud of Mackendra's report, she would throw it up in the bin, tearing it up into hundreds of pieces, and would not even say an encouraging word to Mackendra. I would watch her read my sister's report card and physically snigger. If my sister was hurt by my mother's actions, it actually never showed, for my sister never battered so much as an eyelid. One day it hit me like a bolt of lightning. My mother was insanely jealous of my sister. My mother hated and despised her, as she was everything my mother was not: positive, happy, pretty, clever, fun. I also believe that my mother begrudgingly discerned that Mackendra would ultimately succeed in life, and all her dreams would come into fruition. I discerned my mother despised Mackendra for that, and the jealousy she exhibited towards my sister was all-consuming, but amazingly not discerned by Mackendra herself, who just had such a sunny disposition. She couldn't believe bad about anyone. My mother was a skinny woman with short, naturally blonde, curly hair, a heavily wrinkled face, weathered skin and blue eyes. She had that jaundiced, tired look about her, rather like an old leather purse that had seen better days, and had been left out in the rain all night, no longer in the prime of its life, as it had been wilfully neglected and disregarded. My mother's greatest assets were her long legs. She was skinny. She smoked so much that her appetite was often suppressed and reduced to that of a mouse, so she barely ate a thing. People would say, "Chantel, you've got the greatest legs." I don't think my mother ever looked good a day in her life, so her attractive assets were wasted on her. She always dangled a cigarette in the corner of her mouth, and perpetually wore a scowl on her face. I used to wonder what my mother would look like if she smiled. I realized that over the course of her life she had scowled so much that when she wasn't making any expression at all on her face, it always appeared as if she was scowling, even when she was attempting a smile. I'd heard of a monk once who meditated so much in one position every day of his life that his feet had left their indentations in the wood. I think it was rather like that with my mother. It was like her mouth had set in that expression that she wore every day of her life, like a jelly in a mould. So it couldn't change. That being said, to put not too fine a point on it, my mother naturally always looked pugnaciously bad-tempered. Believe it or not, there were distinct advantages for having a grumpy-looking mother, for she became our quintessential perfect excuse why no one was ever invited back to our house to play, or why the teachers at our school avoided any personal contact with her. Most of the kids at school would take one hard look at my mother if she ever came to watch us playing sport, instantly deciding that they didn't like her at all, which would mean that me and my sister would be invited to our friends' houses to play, but they would never expect to be invited back to our place, and even if we had asked them, they would never have accepted our invitation back, because everyone was begrudgingly wary of my mother, with the exception of the people at the trailer park who had grown used to my mother's grouchy ways. She was the miserable bag that barely paid her children any attention. That was how she was viewed by almost everyone who met her. Our bedraggled clothes we wore to school were not a result of being children from a poor background, but the symptom of a disinterested mother whom didn't care a toss and was apathetically indifferent to her children's needs. I remember overhearing a mother saying to another lady at the school gates once, "That woman is an appalling mother. I mean, what kind of a mother allows her children uniforms to turn to rags like that? That woman wants locking up. She should be ashamed of herself." "Well, look at the way she presents herself," says another mother. "She's one of those people that doesn't give a toss about anything. I don't think that woman has seen a hairdresser in a decade, and by all accounts she smokes like a chimney. It's the children I feel sorry for." Suffice to say, it would seem that our secret life living at a trailer park remained conveniently shrouded and veiled by obscurity, which was something we appreciated gladly, not wanting anyone to uncover the stark, grim reality of how we actually lived, for many would have been horrified by our bland, mediocre living conditions that, although sanitary, were less than desirable. The narrow aluminium walls of our incommodious trailer home would always rattle precariously when the wind slammed against the house, and sometimes pictures hanging on the wall would slide backwards and forwards and threaten to fall. The whole house would almost rock like a boat out at sea on choppy waters. It was small, confined and narrow, a main living area with a couple of threadbare couches, which my mother had flung a couple of velvety red throws over to make them look a little better, a tiny kitchenette where you could barely swing a cat, along with 2 bedrooms with built-in cupboards and a pokey bathroom. My mother worked at an old-age home, washing dishes and sometimes helping in cooking meals for the residents. The pay was pitiful, much of which she spent on an excessive supply of cigarettes for herself, but I was exceedingly grateful to have a roof over our heads. I think the owner of the trailer park was out to make as much money as he possibly could, so the trailers were literally parked on top of each other, with only a little yard space between each trailer, so if someone sneezed, coughed or had an argument, you would almost certainly know about it. All the mobile homes looked alike. With white paint, they were pedestrian, mediocre and nondescript. It was common to have leaks around the roof, sink, toilet and bath area, while the piping was less than substantial. When me and my sister would return home from school after we'd completed our homework, we would go and play out in the woodgrove at the rear of the property, as we loved it out there. It was a haven for all kinds of indigenous wildlife, from rabbits, squirrels, chipmunks, deers and coyotes. It stretched out for miles, and for me and my sister it was like an invaluable, much-cherished playground to us. The sprawling, sumptuous woods consisted of flowering dogwoods, beeches, red oaks and Douglas fir trees. Whenever we were in the woodgrove, we would forget about our dingy, poky little trailer and just enjoy being in the shaded sanctuary that was viridescent in its brilliant, sparkling resplendence. The dark earthen, rich, fertile floor was sometimes spongy with mulch, was generously covered in a plethora of fern, mosses, funguses and wild flowers, along with loose fallen tree trunks carpeted in thick green moss. It always smelt of pine and fresh earth. We loved the way the soft shafts of sunlight would twinkle through the arched forest canopy, bespeckling it with a soft, ethereal light. One day after me and my sister returned home from school, we asked my mother if we might go on a camping weekend with many of the other kids in our school. That was the following weekend, an event which had been sponsored generously by one of the parents, but obviously extra costs would be incurred, like spending money for the kids to buy refreshments, along with tip money for the driver, which my mother was not willing to pay out of her own pocket.
"Please, Mummy, can we go?"
I begged, presenting the leaflet to her. Please, ma'am, all the costs will be covered, but they're asking for spending money for the kids and obviously tip money for the driver. They give you a recommended amount. Absolutely not, she snapped. You know I can't afford to send you both on a camping trip. What do you think? I'm made of money. But, ma'am, piped Mackenzie, you only need to do an extra shift at the old age home. Surely it wouldn't kill you. Enough, Mackenzie. Don't you dare go pointing an accusatory finger at me. Or viciously implying, for that matter, that I don't do enough for you kids. I work bloody hard at that nursing home, busting my gut for the two of you. And I need my rest. I'll be damned if I have to work an extra day so that the two of you can go camping. I need some me time to relax, to let my hair down. How dare you insinuate I'm not doing enough for you? Do I not buy you clothes from the thrift store? Put a decent roof over your head? Even if it does leak from time to time, I fill your bellies with food so you don't go hungry. And to top it all up, you both go to a great school. But I will be damned if I have to work harder than I need to. It's a luxury we can ill afford. But, Mum, surely you can do that for us. We would do it for you if the boot were on the other foot. How dare you, Mackenzie? You're not me. You don't have the first clue what it's like to be me. What I have to do so selflessly. What I've sacrificed for the two of you over the years. I could have bogged off into the sunset for a far better life like your dad did. But did I do that? No, I didn't. He couldn't give a toss about the two of you. But I stuck around to raise you both, to give you a decent life. But there are limits. You can't expect me to give you the icing on the cake. I know the rich kids at your school get the icing, but you two need to realise I can't afford the bloody icing. It's a frivolous waste, and I'm not paying for excesses in your lives. So no, you can't go camping. My decision is final. I remember I'd been utterly devastated. Everyone at school had been talking excitedly and enthusiastically about camping near Mount Rainier, the tallest mountain in the Cascade Range. The peak is located east of Eatonville and southeast of Tacoma and Seattle. But me and my sister had to tell our teachers we weren't allowed to go, which was so upsetting. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Macy, said my teacher, Mrs. Randall. Did your mother say why she doesn't want you to go? I shook my head vigorously, trying my best to hold back the tears that were threatening to spill down my cheeks. I could never tell anyone that it was about the money. It was always about the money. Is your mother very strict? Mrs. Randall asked me. I nodded. I understand, dear. I really do. My father was like that with me when I was a little girl. It was his way or the highway. But don't let it get you down, dear. One day when you're grown up into a big girl, you'll be able to go and camp near Mount Rainier as often as you like. Won't that be nice? I nodded. Yes, Miss Randall, I'd said. But when I returned home that night, I sobbed and sobbed until I made my comforter as wet as a towel after a bath. What's wrong, Macy? Said my sister. You look so sad. We can't go camping next weekend with the school, I complained. I want to go. If only Mum would work an extra shift for us, then we could go. We only need a little extra money. Why does she have to be so mean? Macy took my hand in hers and gave it a tight squeeze. Just because we can't go camping near Mount Rainier doesn't mean we can't go camping. What do you mean? Well, we could go camping here, could we not? In the woodgrove. We can have our own little adventure. How about that? But we don't have a tent, nor do we have any sleeping bags. Yes, but Mr. Craddock has, at trailer number 16, and he's a very nice, agreeable old man. I'm sure he'll lend us his pop-up tent and sleeping bags for a bit of bartering. He always likes cigarettes. We can give him a couple of boxes of Mum's, but we mustn't tell Mum about it, especially because it's my idea, because she'll put a spanner in the works. She'll definitely say no. So can we really go camping? I said, my eyes brightening. Of course, said my sister, and it'll be more fun than Mount Rainier. I promise you that. My sister's enthusiasm was infectious. I had to believe my sister, that it would be more fun camping in our woodgrove than at Mount Rainier. I couldn't be jealous of my friends. So I chose to be excited about the following weekend, when we would creep out of our trailer in the middle of the night, when my mother was fast asleep. Doing something rebellious that my mother would find displeasing made the idea of camping in the middle of the woodgrove at night even more exciting. We would also be getting one up on her. Better still, me and my sister had done some odd jobs for the owner of the campground and earned extra petty cash, so we'd bought ourselves cookies, chips, sodas, and so on. Mr. Craddock had been more than delighted to lend us his camping gear in exchange for a couple of packs of my mother's cigarettes, which we pinched from her without her knowledge, so the bartering had gone down a treat. I wake up in the middle of the night, with my sister Mackendra shaking me vigorously. I'm like the sleeping dead when I fall into a deep sleep. I feel as if I'm caught up in a vivid illusory dream, of which Mackendra is playing a vital part. I hear her calling me in this visionary experience, where all the pieces seem to fit together so perfectly and make such sense, but in the cold light of day they most certainly would not. I then come to the idiosyncratic, rather incongruous, irrational revelation that the voice of my sister is coming from outside my dream state. It's not part of it. "Wake up, Macy! It's me, Mackendra! Wake up! Wake up! Are you ready for our exciting adventure?" I sit up in my bed, while the soft diaphanous prisms of silvery moonlight daintily feather through a faint crack in the rather bedraggled curtains from my bedroom window. For a moment I feel disorientated, rather muddled, trying to get a grasp on my bearings. I almost feel as if the rug has been pulled up from under my feet. I've momentarily forgotten about our camping adventure we'd planned. That is until I hear Mackendra's voice again. "Are you ready, Macy, to go camping?" my sister repeats eloquently. Then I hear her poignant words, and my memory comes flooding back, like the jet current from a powerful water hose. Of course, we're going camping. My heart begins to flap like a dozen pigeons, beating and pummeling their wings inside my chest. I feel a bounteous enthusiasm bounding through my bloodstream like a babbling brook or a powerful waterfall. I can't remember a time in my young childhood that I felt more enervated with excitement. "I'm ready," I whispered, wasting no time to hurriedly throw on my jeans, along with a sweatshirt and some sneakers at breakneck speed. My sister is carrying the pop-up tent and 2 sleeping bags loaned to us by Mr. Craddock in my mother's old backpack, which is flung haphazardly over her back. We're rearing to go, like 2 very ebullient horses champing at the bit and requiring a large tug at the reins to keep them in check. One thing is for certain, we can't afford to wake up my mother. We need to exercise caution and discretion when we clandestinely evacuate the trailer, for if we make the slightest noise, our camping trip will be over before it's even started. We hear the sound of my mother's deep snores in the main bedroom. We're ever grateful that when she falls fast asleep, she's out like a light, and is possibly a deeper sleeper than even I am, which means that potentially a rhino could be charging around her bedroom, and she would be unlikely to notice. But we simply cannot afford to take any chances, or it'll cost us our camping trip. We cautiously tiptoe past her bedroom, but with every footstep the floorboards creak and groan. It doesn't help that our rubber sneakers squeak as we walk. We make it towards the front door, thrusting the key firmly in the lock, as discreetly as we can. I panic as the lock makes a loud, grating sound. We stealthily push open the door as quietly as we can, but it does not graciously accommodate our discretion, as it squeaks so loudly. It hasn't been oiled in yonks. Me and my sister stand very still. We listen and wait. But thankfully my mother is fast asleep. So we slip out of the door, clicking the front door behind us, while surreptitiously hiding the key under the old frayed welcome mat. We stand outside the trailer just for a moment longer, like 2 stationary trees, sucking in our breath so tightly that our stomach muscles clench. We're waiting to see if my mother has heard us at all, but we are met with a reassuring silence, apart from the familiar songs of the crickets and the croaks of the frogs that jubilantly embrace the night with their comforting, cheerful chorus. My sister is carrying a torch to light the way up for us, as our dependence on this invaluable quintessential light source is very significant. But the silvery light of an almost full moon affably illuminates a black sky, so that it softens down to a greyish hue, which means visibility on this night is magnanimous. The twinkling stars smile down at us incandescently, bedazzling the firmament with a plethora of 1,000,000,000 glittering diamonds that rather remind me of diamante jewels set in a velvety black fabric. Me and my sister glide cautiously past the long line of trailer homes towards the statuesque tall majestic Douglas fir trees that fringe the outer perimeters of the wood grove. We're holding our breaths, almost as if we're diving under the water to conserve oxygen. But once we enter the safe confines of the trees, we gobble up the delicious fresh air so gratefully. Our rubber soles pad and squeak along the fertile rich mulch of this earthen trail. It's spongy under our feet, dappled with a generous confetti of leaves, twigs and pine needles. The forest smells of their arresting volatile compounds, with peppery and minty notes of the pine. We sigh with relief, for we know no one appeared to see us leaving our trailer. Well, we hope so anyway. I'm surprised by how different this woodland sanctuary appears at night. It's a whole nother place. The woods itself are a lot darker, as the canopy above our heads shrouds out the light in dense spots of this woodland retreat, while other areas are more open to receiving the light of the moon. The forest is steeped in a beguiling, mysterious intrigue, for in the dark shadows secrets can remain hidden and obscured. Animals can take cover and melt into the night seamlessly, hiding under the fauna and flora, crawling out during the night hours when they're less visible to prying predatory eyes. Even the trees are like tall, lofty, dignified, magisterial giants, bedecked in garlands of sable finery, while the earthen floor is richly garnished with the configurations, curves and sultry forms of the plant life that shade the night with a solid density, devoid of detail and definition. For the fuzzy ambiguousness of every fern and wildflower is shrouded by this twilight in the more dense parts of this resplendent oasis. Slivers of a soft pearly moonlight dance delicately through the forest canopy, its soft accents dappling the forest floor in ribbons of ethereal light. But we need the light of our torch in order to see our way clearly. We know where we're going, as we move stealthily towards a small clearing in the woods. With the light of my torch balanced precariously on a tree branch, me and my sister take no time at all to prepare our camp. We unleash our pop-up tent and unroll our sleeping bags on the ground inside the tent, and then there we are, in the middle of the forest, camping under the trees. Could things be more brilliant than this? Somehow I don't think so. Me and my sister eagerly open up our large bag of snacks to enjoy our midnight feast. It's exciting to be out in the woods at night, with the sounds of the night so close to the open door of the tent. It's while I'm eating my second chocolate chip cookie that serenades my tongue with a burst of rich sweet creaminess, washed down with cold chocolate milk, that I hear a strange grunting sound. What's that? I say to my sister. But I'm not afraid, just curiously intrigued. We hear it again. A series of grunts. Me and my sister stealthily slip behind the trees, moving towards the curious sound. And then we see him. It's old Mr. Murphy, whom is forever getting drunk. He lives in trailer number 5. But every morning the people who reside in trailer number 25 find the man snoring loudly, fast asleep outside their trailer. They've become increasingly annoyed with him of late, as he always chooses to sleep all his excesses off outside their front door. My mother reckons he's so drunk he simply can't find his way back to his own trailer. Mr. Murphy is swaggering like a tree, wagging a large bottle of whiskey hazardously in his hands and knocking it back. He continues to drink, and it's like he's talking to the trees, engaged in a drunken conversation involving grunts, chuckles, hiccups and burps. Me and my sister can't stop giggling. He's really amusing to watch.
I can't believe how drunk he is, says my sister Mackendra. I think he's talking to the trees. I'm not sharing my whiskey with you. No, I'm not. I can't stand haughty people. Why don't you talk to me? Why don't you talk to me? Too stuck up, are you? Full of yourself, are you? Oh, yes, you're full of yourself. I'm not giving you any of my whiskey. No way am I going to give you any of my whiskey. Stop staring at me. Stop staring at me. Did your mother teach you it's rude to stare? Rude to stare.
He can barely stand up straight. We watch this real-life theatre unfold before our very eyes. For a long while, obliviously unaware that things are about to get a whole lot more dramatic, when quite suddenly Mr. Murphy falls down onto the soft earthen ground in a crumpled heap. I think he's passed out from his drunken stupor. Before long, we hear him snoring loudly. Good thing he hasn't fallen asleep outside the Welsh's trailer again. They're so hacked off with him at the moment. We're about to retreat into our tent when we hear this thumping sound. It sounds as if ponderous, very large feet are moving towards us. It sounds as if they're bipedal. But who could walk with such a heavy stance? We hear forest bracken breaking, twigs and branches snapping off trees. My heart begins to pound violently in my chest as a fearful anxiety is engaged. What the hell is that? I whisper to my sister nervously. My sister shrugs her shoulders in a nonchalant way. Stay very still, she whispers. Everything has become quiet in this woodland oasis, as the sounds of the crickets and frogs seem to have evacuated this place, which makes the snoring of Mr. Murphy become unusually pronounced. Then we see something moving through the trees as the branches begin to swing up and down, bouncing back to their original position, their leaves still jiggling. Oh my God, what is that? For a moment I suck in a deep breath, for in the darkness of the night, under the shadows of the moonlight, I see a tall, dense silhouette that is built like a giant human being, covered in black hair and easily over 8 foot tall. What is that? I ask, astonished by this ambiguous creature. I'm far too intrigued to be nervous or afraid, as an initial anxiety that had ripped through my heart has been stilled, overtaken by a powerful inquisitive curiosity that has thrown all my fear to the wayside. The idiosyncratic, rather ambiguous creature picks up Mr. Murphy in his overlong arms, flinging him over his shoulders like a small sack of potatoes. But the unconscious man continues to snore heedlessly, unsuspecting of the strange mode of transportation that he has unwittingly recruited, that is gracefully delivering him from the forest to the trailer park. We stealthily creep behind this strange creature, following him through the woodgrove, hoping he doesn't know we're there. Before long we find ourselves hiding behind a tall ponderosa pine tree that overlooks the eco-friendly light outside the Welsh's mobile home of trailer number 25, which is in close proximity to the woodgrove. We see the creature clearly. It's a Bigfoot. We are completely gobsmacked, for we both know how many kids in our class at school would trade places with us in a heartbeat to see what we're seeing now. The creature lowers Mr. Welsh carefully to the ground. It would seem a mysterious conundrum is now answered. Mr. Welsh clearly goes to the woodgrove to drink. Then the Bigfoot returns him to the Welsh's trailer every night, where he sleeps off his drunken stupor until the morning. We watch the creature gliding back into the forest, and then he's gone. After he's dropped off Mr. Murphy, it's just all we can do to stop talking about the Bigfoot. Didn't I tell you we'd have more fun tonight than the kids who went camping near the Cascades? Am I not right? Says McKendra. I nod excitedly. We return to our tent and talk for ages about what we've seen, our eyes shining so brightly. We're not worried about sleeping in the forest, for the ambiguous Bigfoot didn't give us cause for concern in regards to our own safety. On the contrary, we believed he had brought Mr. Murphy back to safety, as being passed out on a forest floor so drunk that you're almost comatose to your environment may make you a sitting duck to predators whom can easily take advantage of your inebriated state. We wake up in the morning to the sound of Mrs. Welsh's voice. She's not amused at all, and is peering at us through the tent opening. What the hell is going on here? Miss Welsh continues. If you kids want to camp in this trailer park, be my guest, but not bloody outside our front door like Mr. Murphy. If you want to do that, you should have camped outside your own door, but not ours." I'm so sleepy that Mrs. Welsh's words appear to fall on deaf ears. But as I glance out of the tent opening, I see we're indeed camped outside the Welsh's trailer. How can this be real? How did that even happen? We were camped out in the clearing in the woods, but now our pop-up tent is parked outside the Welsh's trailer. Mr. Welsh is now peering in at us angrily through the opening of the tent. He is clearly piqued.
"If this is your idea of a funny joke, McKendra, do I look like I'm laughing? No, I'm not. Do you think this is remotely funny?"
Mr. Welsh looks furious. His brown eyes are glaring at us. His jowls are jiggling with indignation. I'm sorry, Mr. Welsh. I can't explain," says my sister. Mr. Welsh wilfully ignores my sister's comments. He enters our tent boldly. He's now shaking the body of the snoring Mr. Murphy, who finally rises up to his feet, like an unsteady, rickety camping table that is missing a leg or two. For a moment he looks bemused and disorientated, as he tries to swim through his drunken oblivion, as he snatches at reality, trying to make sense of what is real and what is not. Mr. Welsh shouts at Mr. Murphy.
"How many times have I told you to stop sleeping outside our trailer, Mr. Murphy? But will you learn? No, you won't. You do it every single night, and I've had enough. And now you brought these 2 kids with you as well. What on earth is going on with you?"
Mr. Murphy grunts, and then capriciously swaggers as he hobbles unsteadily back to his own trailer. He still sounds drunk.
"Sorry, Mr. Welsh. Have a good day. Have a good day to you. Where's my whiskey? Where's my whiskey? Who's taken my whiskey?"
He passes out in front of his own door, and then finishes off his disrupted sleep. The stench of Mr. Murphy's whiskey has almost certainly infiltrated the whole tent with its caramel sweet sickly smell.
"Wait until I tell your mother about this, McKendra. I don't think she's going to be the least bit amused, and I hope she punishes you appropriately,"
pipes Mr. Welsh. My sister and I gather up our camping gear, silently, while Mr. and Mrs. Welsh stare at us with hostile, belligerent, vulture-like eyes that betray that they'd like to tear us apart, limb from limb. They're so irate. We quickly return our camping gear to Mr. Craddock, neither of us saying a word. We feel as if we'd been caught with our pants down. We can see Mr. Welsh shaking his head indignantly, glaring at us as we shamefully return to our trailer. A while later, he's slamming loudly on our trailer door. My mother is still wearing her pyjamas. She comes to the door, warily wiping the sleep away from her eyes. "What's going on?"
"Perhaps your daughter McKendra can explain," screams Mr. Welsh. "You know we've been having problems with that drunken Mr. Murphy sleeping outside our trailer every morning. And now your bloody kids have chosen to accompany him in this outrageous nightly pursuit. What the hell is wrong with people around here? That's what I'd like to know. We woke up this morning to find that your children were camped outside our trailer with old Mr. Murphy in a pop-up tent. The 3 of them were sharing it together."
My mother looks confused. I don't understand at all.
"It's simple. Your children were camping with Mr. Murphy in a tent outside our trailer. Do I really need to have to spell it out to you? Why is everyone dossing outside our trailer? If your children want to camp out here in the woodgrove, they're welcome to, but not outside our front door. What on earth is wrong with people around here? Is everybody as loopy as a fruitcake?"
"I'm so sorry, Mr. Welsh," says my mother. "I'll make sure this never happens to you again. I agree with you. This is outrageous behaviour on my children's parts. It's not acceptable. I can only think it must have been some kind of a joke. As for the life of me, I can't imagine what they thought they were doing, pulling a stunt like that. I can only apologise." "What the hell do you think you were doing camping outside the Welsh's trailer, McKendra?" says my mother, laying all the accusations at my sister's door and bypassing me. Once Mr. Welsh has left, my mother loves any excuse to lash out at my sister. I'm sorry, Mum," says McKendra. "I can explain what happened," I intercede. "It wasn't McKendra's fault. I think it was—" Before I can tell my mother about a Bigfoot that offloaded Mr. Murphy outside the Welsh's trailer, and I suspect must have done exactly the same to us, my sister sagaciously intercedes and stops me in my tracks, for she knows that if we suggest this is the work of a Bigfoot, my mother isn't going to buy a word of it, and such preposterous, outlandish allegations will only add fuel to the fire and intensify my mother's anger quite significantly. "I'm sorry, Mum," she confesses. "It won't happen again. We just thought it would be funny." "What the hell is wrong with you, McKendra? How could you think that would be funny, even for a single moment? Have you lost leave of your senses? Every time Mr. Murphy gets drunk, the Welshers find him lying completely plastered, fast asleep outside their trailer. And now they wake up this morning to find all three of you dossing outside their trailer, camped out in a tent. They have every right to be as mad as hell." My mother is trembling as she reaches for her box of cigarettes. She quickly pulls out a cigarette and pops it into her mouth, lighting the end. She takes a deep puff, blowing the smoke into the trailer. It's amazing how one puff of a cigarette seems to steady my mother's nerves. "Why were you camping in the first place?" she asked. "And where did you get the tent from?" "Mr. Craddock lent us his tent for the night." My mother takes another puff of her cigarette. "Now I see what this is all about. I get it. This isn't about playing a joke on the Welshers at all, is it? It's about getting your back on me, because I wouldn't work an extra shift so that you could go camping near the Cascades. So you decided to go camping outside the Welsh's front door as a joke. But the joke's on me, isn't it?" "I'm sorry, Mum. You're right," says McKendra. "That's what it is about. We felt very hurt that you weren't prepared to work an extra shift for us, Mum. I mean, if the boot were on the other foot, and you were my daughter wanting to go on a camping trip, I would have worked an extra shift for you in a heartbeat. In fact, Mum, I would do anything for my kids to make them happy. Anything." My mother takes a puff of her cigarette, and her face flushes bright red. "Go to your room right now, McKendra. Don't you dare speak to your mother like this." My sister and I soon come to the firm conviction that it must have been the same Bigfoot that delivered Mr. Murphy outside the door of trailer number 25 that had clandestinely also carried us out of the forest and parked us outside the very same trailer. But why had we not woken up? How had the Bigfoot managed to relocate our camping location, with both of us remaining in our sleeping bags and still in our pop-up tent? Me and my sister tried to reflect over that night, to see if we had any recollection of anything unusual that happened, but we couldn't remember anything. We had been very excited about observing a Bigfoot and had talked about it all night, until we'd fallen asleep. We weren't afraid of the creature, as he hadn't harmed Mr. Murphy, so he was also likely to leave us alone. We had talked about the creature all night, both agreeing that our camping adventure had to be way better than the kids at school. As we had encountered a Bigfoot, it would be difficult to trump that. But why on earth did the Bigfoot want us out of the forest that night? I don't have an answer to that enigmatic question, but I consider it an extreme privilege to have encountered such an awe-inspiring beast, and me and my sister McKendra decided to keep our encounter with the creature under lock and key. Fast forward about 15 years, and at 25 years old, my sister McKendra had made so much money working with a computer company, where her ingenious abilities had been highly rewarded. She had purchased a posh house for us in the same street we had walked down as girls on the way back home from school. I'll certainly never forget the day I moved into this illustrious property with my mother. It was one of the most wonderful days of my entire life. I was bedazzled that my sister McKendra's promise all those years ago had come into fruition. Why had I ever doubted her? She was even paying for me to go to college. We were living the kind of lifestyle I could only have envisaged in my wildest dreams. McKendra had allowed us to select our own furnishings to make our bedrooms complement our personalities. But all the while, my mother was no more happy than she was at the trailer park. She perpetually wore a frown on her face. Our standard of living had gone up in leaps and bounds. There was a refrigerator filled daily with delicious food. Me and my mother had been given extra cash to buy anything we wanted for ourselves. Whenever my sister Mackendra's back was turned, my mother would badmouth her at every single opportunity. Mackendra was blindly oblivious to the nasty looks that my mother would give her behind her back. "Your sister Mackendra's getting far too big for her boots these days," she complained to me one day. "Thinks she's the bee's knees, doesn't she? Just 'cause she's done well for a piddling computer company. It's no big deal. It's pathetic. She reminds me of your father, always so eager to please, so determined to give us everything." "You mean our father was like Mackendra," I say. "I thought you said he couldn't give a toss about us." My mother winces for a moment, and she gathers her lie together as convincingly as she can. "Well, he was very ambitious, like Mackendra, believing that the only obstacles in life were the ones we make ourselves. But he wanted nothing to do with you and your sisters, as I keep telling you," she says, avoiding eye contact with me. "But yes, he was annoyingly optimistic all the time, just like Mackendra. The two of them are like peas in the pod. It would drive me mad. Do you know how annoying it is to live with someone who's always in a good mood?" "Well, that's a good thing, I say, is it not, Mum? I wish I was more like Mackendra. She always believes that she'll attain her goals, and then she does. You know why, Mum? I think she nurtures no seeds of doubt. When I was a little girl, we'd walk down the street together out there. She promised me that one day she'd buy us one of these houses, that we'd live on a street like this. She'd provide for our every need, and she's more than lived up to her promise in leaps and bounds. She's a success story in our family, upon which we should feel so much gratitude and pride. I was the one that was cynical. I was the one that believed my sister's aspirations were all pie in the sky. I couldn't get out of my poverty mindset. I could never envisage a life beyond the trailer park. Maybe I've inherited your scepticism, Mum, I say." "You say that as if it's a bad thing, Macy," my mother says churlishly. "It's realistic to be sceptical. It means you have your feet firmly on the ground." Mackendra turns a negative situation into a positive one. It drove me insane. I remember when our pipe burst in the trailer, she said to me, "Mum, look on the bright side. We're getting a new pipe, so it'll take longer for it to burst now." My pipe had burst, for God's sake. There was water all over the place, and Mackendra harps on about the good side of a burst pipe. It made me want to scream in frustration. Regardless about what you say about Mackendra, Mum, if it wasn't for her, God knows where we would be living now. The trailer park has been demolished. There's now a fancy house being built in that large field in front of the woodgrove. We've a lot to be thankful for. God knows what would have become of us without Kendra's ambitious drive to make something of herself. If I didn't know any better, Mum, I'd say you're very jealous. I've seen the way you look at Mackendra. I'm certain I've seen the green-eyed monster in your eyes. I mean, I get it, Mum. Mackendra is everything I wish I could be. She's tenacious, pretty, astute, wise, clever and brilliant. I'd love to be like her, as I regularly struggle with doubt." "Oh, please, Macy, you do talk such nonsense. I'm not jealous of Mackendra, not at all. Don't be so ridiculous." One day, as me, Mackendra and my mother were watching television, the television flicks to the news. I'm looking for the control that has slipped at the back of the couch. But just as I'm about to change the channel, my mother stops me. "Wait, Macy," she says. "I need to listen to this quickly." "I'm standing in front of this old house here in 2nd Street, says the reporter. "A very attractive tree-lined neighbourhood here in Seattle at number 46. The owner of the property, Mr. Morris Davis, began to renovate the front patio on Thursday morning. They discovered human remains buried 7 feet under the patio, which have now been taken to the morgue. No one knows who the remains belong to, but the investigation remains ongoing." "So, Mr. Morris, what exactly happened here?" "Well, I wasn't particularly happy with the patio. As you can see, it was in a very bad state of repair. So we decided to get building contractors in to bulldoze it up, so we could start again. Besides, we wanted to extend the area out further. But then, when the builders began to dig up the area, they found human remains. Very disturbing indeed." "I'm sure. I can't imagine. It must have unsettled your family." "Oh, absolutely. Now we're having our whole front yard dug up by the police to check that there are no more human remains buried under my house. It's a crime scene. My family is grievously upset about this incident." My mother's face whitens. The colour drains from her skin. "Are you all right, Mum?" I ask. "You've gone deathly pale." "I'm fine, but I think I'm not feeling that well. I'm going to bed right now. I feel quite drained." Me and my sister look at each other in surprise. My mother hasn't touched the pizza which she was eager to eat only moments ago. Something about this news article has rattled her cage, but my sister and I think no more of it. The next morning I wake up and glide down the sweeping staircase to the kitchen to get myself a glass of cold milk from the refrigerator. It's still dark outside. It's about 5 o'clock in the morning. But as I make my way back up the staircase towards my bedroom, I smell this strange plastic smell in the air, as if something is burning. My eyes happen to glance at my mother's bedroom door. I notice a pink blanket propped up against the outside of the door, as if blocking any air vents. I knock on my mother's door. "Hi, Mum! Mum, are you in there? It smells very smoky. It smells like something is burning plastic. Are you there? Are you all right?" There is no answer. I enter the room. I know something is terribly wrong. My mother is lying on the bed, flat on her back, her eyes glazed over like a dead fish, her mouth hanging open. I know it's too late, even before I see her. She looks like she's been dead for an awfully long time. The room is thick and stuffy, oppressively heavy. The burning smell is really bad. I see my mother has connected an old camping heater we once owned to the mains. I didn't even know we still owned it. We were told not to use it, as it would give us all carbon monoxide poisoning, as it was leaking an orangey-brown liquid. I remember my mother asking the man in the camping shop, "Are you saying if I use this camping heater in my own bedroom, it would kill me?" "Almost certainly, ma'am. You need to throw it away. It cannot be repaired. It's exceedingly dangerous." Why had my mother kept this camping heater after so many years? The mind boggles. I switch off the appliance and dart over to the window, throwing it open, taking desperate gulps of air, as just being in my mother's room for a couple of seconds is making me feel quite heady. That's when I notice an envelope on the sideboard saying for the police only. I grab the envelope and dart outside. I open it to see what it says. It reads, "If you find me dead, I want you to know my daughter Makendra is responsible. Even in death, my mother wants to blame Makendra for something she never did. Makendra doesn't have a mean bone in her body, but throughout her life, my mother has never liked her and has been insanely jealous of her upbeat attitude. I think she was jealous of Makendra, as she knew her daughter would definitely reach her aspirations. My mother has tried to frame my sister for her untimely death, but it's not going to happen. I can see she deliberately packed the pink blanket outside her door to look like it was done by someone else, as it was outside the door. But when I was leaning outside of the closed window to take some much-needed gulps of air, I noticed some muddy footprints on the ground below. It's easy to climb out of the window in my mother's room from outside the house. I think she was hoping there might be a fleeting chance Makendra could be blamed for her death. I tear up the envelope, wondering how my mother could ever believe that the police could fall for such a translucent scam. I'm no detective inspector myself, but I can see right through her duplicity, as if I was looking through a pane of glass. Maybe she wanted my sister to know she was despised by her. I can't fathom why my mother took her own life with an appliance she knew was dangerous. I reflect on the previous night, how a television program about a house in Seattle, where some bones were recovered under the patio, had turned my mother's face as white as snow. She had promptly returned to her bedroom and disregarded her meal. Was her death connected to the report on the news that seemed to cause her a great amount of distress? It seemed more than a little likely. Could this have anything to do with the disappearance of my father? A cold chill runs down the back of my spine. My father had no surviving family members, so when he went missing, no suspicions were raised. Did my mother have anything to do with my father's disappearance? I don't want to think about this right now. I should really be grieving my mother's inopportune passing, but these enigmatic, perplexing, rather stirring questions are bombarding my mind like the fireworks exploding on the 4th of July. Makendra is devastated about my mother's death. I had squirreled away the pink blanket from outside my mother's door, torn up the letter my mother had written, trying to pin the blame for her suicide on my sister. My sister Makendra was oblivious to how jealous my mother was of her in life, and I wanted to keep her in the dark about that. The police arrive at our home, as does the coroner. We are promptly told to stay away from the property until it's safe to return. At the police station, me and Mackendrah are questioned about my mother. I'm whisked into an interview room to speak to an officer called Roy Murray. He's a man in his early 40s with a receding hairline, a long slender face and very large blue eyes, framed by a pair of very slender lightweight glasses that are so opaque you can barely see them.
I would like to express my commiserations to you, Miss Greenway, for your mother's infelicious passing. It's cases like this that can be very distressing to those of us left behind. I know this is not easy for you under the circumstances, but I would like very much to ask you a few questions, if I may.
Of course, officer. Please go ahead.
Well, we've established that your mother committed suicide by using a faulty appliance that was leaking carbon monoxide. The coroner seems reasonably satisfied that this was a suicide, as there was red warning tape on the appliance, along with a danger label, saying that it was dangerous to use. So your mother willfully used this gadget, rather like a poison gas. But we wouldn't be doing our jobs correctly if we didn't ask you some questions. Do you know, Miss Greenway, why your mother would so randomly take her own life like this? Was she suffering from depression? Why did she have a faulty gadget available in your home? You can take one look at it and know it's dodgy.
Well, sir, I do know she wasn't suffering from depression at all. My mother, Sheriff, wasn't an easy woman. People didn't warm to her at all. They didn't like her very much. She always looked miserable, but she wasn't depressed. It was just her nature to always frown and to see the world in a rather negative light. Well, she wasn't at that rock-bottom place, Sheriff, where she actually wanted to end her life. Far from it, actually.
I see, says the Sheriff,
wiping the area above his mouth.
But no one commits suicide for no reason at all, do they? Something must have been triggered in her to make her decide to end it all. Has anything upset her recently? Is her health all right? She hasn't been diagnosed with a life-threatening disease, has she? She hasn't had a fallout with a lover or some financial issues?
Well, something odd did happen last night, actually. I don't know if it's related at all, but we were watching a news reporter discussing a case where a body was found under a patio at this house in 2nd Street in Seattle. My mother was watching the programme. She went as white as a sheet and claimed she wasn't hungry and retired to bed. But something about that report distressed her greatly. The next thing we know, she's committed suicide with a camping heater that she knew would ultimately kill her. I remember years ago being at a camping shop with my mother, and she was told to get rid of that heater, as it would surely kill her. So why would she keep it, officer? It's very, very strange.
Well, we'll certainly look into that. You're right, it is rather peculiar.
You know, Sheriff, I think I need to mention, my father disappeared from our lives rather a long time ago. My mother told me then that my dad wanted nothing to do with us and had abandoned us. He worked in a bank in Seattle, was making good money. My mother claimed he upped and left us, wanted nothing to do with us. It was peculiar at the time. My father had no living family members. He was actually raised in an orphanage, you see. We had a good life and lived in a nice home in Seattle. But after my dad left, my mother couldn't afford to keep the home, so me and my sister grew up in a trailer park. The thing is, officer, my mother was a compulsive liar. She lied about everything and nothing. It was the way she was. Everything my mother said about my father not loving us, I never believed was true. My mother tossed a photo album away, but Sheriff, the pictures in that album depict a loving man devoted to his children.
Do you know the address of the house where you lived all those years ago? Could it be that house in 2nd Street where the body was uncovered under the patio? Is that why your mother went as white as a sheet, do you think?
Well, that's my conclusion, Sheriff. I could be way off the mark, but supposing my dad never left our home in Seattle, supposing there was an accident and my mother buried my dad under the patio, if that is his body, it would almost certainly explain why she kept that heater all these years. Perhaps she never wanted to go to prison, and after the body was found and possibly identified as my father's, she'd be out of here and not taken off to a prison cell. It's just a theory, Sheriff, but it is the sort of thing she would do.
So if it's true and your mother did kill your father, Supposing it was deliberate, is there any reason she would end his life that you can think of?
Sheriff, my mother was rather a complicated woman, difficult to understand. She did suffer a lot from the green-eyed monster. She was jealous of my sister Mackendra, who she told me once was exactly like my father. It annoyed her that my sister was positive about life, ambitious and eager to succeed. It bugged her so much, because she knew my sister would reach for the stars and ultimately achieve her goals. I think by contrast my mother knew she would never have the same tenacity and self-belief, so she hated my sister for the qualities she wished she had. When we lived in the trailer, my sister would say, "One day, Mum, I'll take care of both you and Macy. I'll make so much money we'll be able to live in a beautiful part of Seattle." My mother was never pleased. She was always furious. It was nonsensical. I think my dad was possibly exactly the same, positive about life, and it drove my mother insane with jealousy. But that's not exactly a good reason to kill someone, is it? The sheriff looks at me through his astute eyes. "You'll be surprised, Miss Greenway, at the human psyche. People do the strangest things for the most incongruous reason, and jealousy can make people do dreadful things. Jealousy is very toxic." Yes, but Sheriff, don't you see? Everything my dad or Mackendra did was for the benefit of the family, which benefited my mother as well. So why would she be jealous of that?
Well, maybe she wanted to be the success.
To cut a long story short, the police were able to discover that the house had once belonged to my parents, and after my father vanished, the house was ultimately sold by my mother. In recent years, new additions were added to the old property, and finally the patio was lifted up by the bulldozers and a body was discovered, and DNA evidence identified the body as belonging to my father. There was also a hunting rifle registered in my father's name, found next to the body. My father had died from a single gunshot wound to the head. Even all these years later, I believe my mother killed him out of jealousy, as he was everything she wished she was, like my sister Mackendra. These days I visit my father in a very elegant graveyard with a headstone all of his own. Given that my mother is the one who pulled the trigger and killed my father, as proved by the coroner, we decided not to bury them next to each other, but I've come to the conclusion that jealousy is a grievous, very toxic emotion. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.